60 Minutes did indeed cover it very well. And there has been some criticism, but this report has now been peer-reviewed by Professor Simon Maskell from the University of Liverpool, and he is now part of the report. Ocean Infinity, the search company that did the search in 2018, they are going to use this as a basis for a new search. So there's a very high level of confidence. As I said, it's been 4 years in the making, been reviewed over and over again, and they're certain that they've located where this aircraft is.
Good evening, folks, and welcome to Alien Addict on this fine and luxurious evening. It's going to be a luxurious evening because we've got Ashton Forbes sat down there waiting to come on. But, you know, it wouldn't be Alien Addict if we hadn't already touched on this subject before. My two bros.
How you doing, buddy?
David, Lee, you got in touch with Ashton.
I did.
We've covered MH370, I think, a couple of times. We did a full show on it. When you guys showed me the reemergence of this footage, I was like, guys, I don't think this is real. I think this is all fake. And then quite quickly in that show, my mind got completely boggled and flipped. Yeah.
Just proving that you should always listen to me and Dave.
That's it. But no, the evidence is quite compelling. I mean, it was you guys that took me through that, but Ashton's going to take us through it tonight. Ashton, welcome.
Hey, Ollie, Lee, Dave. Nice to see you guys. Let's do this thing tonight.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, mate. I mean, you've fully been doing the circuit, haven't you? You know, you've done like some of the biggest shows in this field that are out there now, and like just want to say thanks for coming on Alien Addicts as well.
Yeah, I like to help out all the alternative media that's out there. You know, I think that no matter how big or small, the most important thing is we get this information out there to as many people as possible. So
yeah,
I want to do it.
Awesome. Well, I had an idea as far as like, well, because I've watched like some various interviews that you've been on so far, and I thought like some of the problems that you've had is the people that have been interviewing you, especially on maybe some of the bigger platforms as well, haven't really known what you've been going in for. So you've been trying to explain these things to people as you're trying to go through some fairly complex stuff. So at least coming in here, we've kind of got a basic idea of what the story is. And I thought you could just give us sort of as concisely, like in the best order you have,
Yeah.
like what the theory is about what happened to MH370.
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, I think that you guys had that clip on right in the intro there that they've pinpointed it now. Like that's
Yeah, that was 2
actually,
months ago.
yeah, I
That
was going to say that was 2 months ago, I think. And they've been rehashing that. That's how the news works, right? And they try to make it seem like it's recent. Like I had people sending me that yesterday. And that's the Whisper report that they were looking at, that picture there. And the reason why I know that is because early on in this investigation, I went through all 300 pages of that Whisper report. Back when I thought that the official narrative that it went to the South Indian Ocean must be true. And I thought the videos that we were looking at must be of the South Indian Ocean, that's must be where it went down. And very quickly, if you go through that Whisper report, you realize that I want to be kind, but it's really just total nonsense. There are several things that happened in that Whisper report that make no sense at all, that I was never comfortable with, even going back to the earliest interviews. And so this plane, they have it going out. So I'll just do a brief synopsis of this flight path. They have it going from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. It gets to the South China Sea going northeast. Plane goes dark. This goes dark 40 minutes after it takes off, 1721 UTC. A lot of people don't realize that that's not the place where the plane disappeared. Like that's just the place where it went dark. That's not where it, theoretically was lost into the ocean or whatever. The plane turns around and goes over continental Malaysia, the peninsula. The Minister of Defense is actually on the record saying that while this plane was unidentified and they have the military radar tracking it, somehow they know it's a commercial airliner and somehow they know it's not hostile, which is very weird claims to make if you don't have communication with this plane. It also goes directly to Penang Langkawi International Airport, which is the closest airport to land a 777 in an emergency situation with a runway long enough. So already these official narratives are like, wait a minute, this is a suicidal pilot. Why is he going to the place where you should go to in an emergency? It doesn't land at Penang, and it goes out into the Malacca Straits, into the Andaman Sea and the Nicobar Islands. Now, and we'll get to this in a minute, but this is where at 1840 UTC, if you go look up all the reports from the next day, this is where they say they lost contact with the plane at 1840 UTC. This is where we think our videos actually happened, but the official narrative says this plane turned into the South Indian Ocean here. This is where the Whisper report starts to fall apart. The Whisper report has this plane following the radar track past Penang, but then it has it like cutting or going around the coast of Indonesia, like a person who's on foot would walk along the coast along the beach. Planes don't do that, right? And that's why early on I wasn't comfortable with what this is doing. Like, why is this plane going around the coast here? It would just go right over Indonesia. It's not going to be trying to go around it. That's not how you avoid radars either. You would have to be like way outside of the coast in order to avoid the radar. So this Whisper report already didn't make a lot of sense to me. It has it going around the coast of Indonesia, and then it has it do a cutback. In the Whisper report, it literally says this plane does this cutback as if it's looking for a plane behind it. That isn't even something you could figure out from random pings. So like the fact that they're trying to make this statement about it made me really skeptical of the analysis. And then it does some even weirder stuff. Then it goes ahead and does a holding pattern for 20 plus minutes. I'm just like, okay, obviously at this point, they lost track of whatever these pings they were trying to follow it with on this Whisper report analysis. And they're just trying to come up with a reason why it doesn't move for 20 minutes in this Whisper report. If this is some kind of suicidal pilot scenario, they're not going to do a holding pattern for 20 minutes. At that point, I was wondering like, oh, this must have been in communication and they're like trying to figure out where to go. And then it has it pointing at all these other airports. And so in the initial Whisper report, I'm thinking, okay, now it's looking at an airport in Australia. Maybe they're looking for a new place to land or whatever. And then they just have the plane going down into the South Indian Ocean in a straight line. And then it does this like weird Bugs Bunny kind of like, or not Bugs Bunny, but like Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote, like spin down until it crashes. Right. And so that's what the official analysis is. And that's where like, I guess this person who's on TV there, I don't know if that was Richard Godfrey or somebody else, where they peer reviewed the report. Like, yeah, I peer reviewed it too. And ultimately determined that it doesn't make any sense. They claimed that, it must have been in some other part of the seventh arc. Like, we just didn't find it. What they don't tell you is they trolled the whole seventh arc with a hydrophonic device, and they found no black boxes anywhere. And it wasn't deep enough that they wouldn't be able to find them. So how did they not find a single black box if it really crashed down there? How was there no debris field? if it crashed down there. This is an active shipping route. There's no witnesses that saw the plane down there, even though they say it crashed in the morning, early morning. It all just kind of falls apart immediately, especially that there's 3 hydrophonic devices, or I'm probably not saying that correctly, but there's 2 hydrophones and the SOSA system, which was declassified, and we had heard about this when the Titan sub popped. All these devices would have heard it. Diego Garcia has hydrophones. Western Australia has hydrophones. No acoustic detections. 2 radar systems. The Jordan system in Australia, it has range to be able to catch anything that's in the South Indian Ocean like that. And Indonesia has a radar system. None of these catch a plane flying out there. So it's like, if you just look at the facts, you realize that there's no chance this plane crashed into the South Indian Ocean. So that's the first thing I like to get across. What are your guys' thoughts on all that?
Well, I remember sat in a pub talking to my mate about it in 2014. And I remember going back then saying there's something strange about this. There is something weird. And that even if you put it down to like the simplest thing, think about the amount of shit that's on a plane that floats.
Yep.
There would be something. There would be something there. And I've never, even before I started watching your stuff, I never got past that. Just the idea that you could have so much stuff, all that luggage, all the stupid plastic stuff that they serve the food in because you can't have real knives anymore.
Even the bodies. The bodies
Yeah.
would have floated too, parts of this plane. This idea that the plane wouldn't break apart on landing is absurd too. Like, the plane's going to rip apart. Even in the ocean, it's much more chaotic than trying to land in the Hudson River like Sully Sullenberger did. This plane's going to rip apart. There's going to be pieces everywhere. We would have found it the next day. The satellites would have seen it the next day.
I've heard the Hudson River thing brought up before, and even when that happened, we were told that was a 1 in a million, like,
exactly,
amazing feat. Yeah.
No, I like where this is going. So, like, one of the things we talked about earlier is watching other interviews with you, and that's, believe me, we have questions, but we just want to hear it directly from you in one concise line. And that first opening's probably the most concise that I've heard you just lay that out without being interrupted. So that just, I think, sets up for the next part of where do you think it went and how did it get there?
Yeah, and that's the hardest part, the most speculative part, because we have videos showing this plane literally disappearing from space-time as we can see it. And so we can kind of have a very good idea of what happened up until that point, where, we think that this is the exact location where the plane, quote unquote, turned into the South Indian Ocean and the Nicobar Islands. We have coordinates in the videos that say that's where it is. So it makes it pretty easy. Now, where it went is a much harder thing. And so we have to speculate here and we have to kind of deduce based on some evidence. So the biggest piece of evidence is that we didn't find a debris field anywhere. So if this plane had teleported somewhere else on Earth and crashed, we should have found a debris field somewhere else, right? Like over in the Atlantic Sea or where else, right? So the fact that we didn't find that tells me that there's a slim chance this plane, didn't crash at all. And maybe these people survived on this and maybe they went somewhere. There's a B777 fire suppression device that washes up in the Maldives several weeks later. Interestingly, the Maldives is intentionally excluded from the search. They never look into this fire suppression device, even though there's a number written right on it, which I imagine is a serial number that could be tied to the plane. This device is a very unique looking device. It looks like one of these cartoon bombs. And it's actually a fire suppression device from a 777. I imagine there's nothing similar looking that looks like that as well. There was also a sighting in the southern Maldives on one of these small islands. I think it's called Kuvo something or other. I'm not going to butcher the name here. But a bunch of islanders all report seeing the plane. It was dismissed because the plane was coming from the wrong direction. They claimed that, it would have been coming from the east if it had come from the Nicobar Islands. But if this plane is somehow teleported, it can come from any direction towards this island. And this would indicate that, and their sighting is very detailed. They see the windows of a jumbo jet. They see the red and white stripe of Malaysia Airlines. I was actually looking into this the other day, and it gets dismissed as a much smaller plane that's only like a 50-seater that's just red and white. It's not even similar to Malaysian Airlines in color or size. So they ignore the Maldives entirely. Well, what's close to the Maldives? Diego Garcia military base, one of the most secretive advanced military bases that's co-joint owned by the United States, leased from the British government. This is where every conspiracy theory had the plane going. It had it being remote controlled there. There's like 5 different people that all said that this is somehow where the plane went. So in my mind, these people were either told something, or the reality is that like this is just the easiest place to hide the plane. You know, Jeff Wise thought that the plane went to Russia. The problem with that theory is there's like 12 radars that are going to catch this plane if it goes to Russia. There's no way they're all going to be able to keep it quiet.
Yeah, can I just
jump
so
on
with
it?
that, I showed my dad that part of the documentary where he was explaining that there was a default on a bad design on the plane, and basically a Russian spy got down there, managed to like shut everybody's oxygen off or whatever, and then pilot the other guy was piloting the plane. So he remote controlled it from the computer, and my dad's just looking at that and going, that is just rubbish. There's no way.
Yeah, I think Jeff Wise knows quite a bit about, you know, avionics in general, and he was just trying to come up with a theory that would work. I think one of the things he did mention, is that you can get to the electronics bay, and that, you know, one thing is apparently you might be able to open the door of the cockpit from that or unlock it. There is actually a secret like unlock mechanism to unlock the plane from the outside using like a passcode, and there might even be another way that I was researching into this to figure that out. I'm of the opinion that there's, you know, over a long period of time, you're going to be able to get into the cockpit. Now, I don't think you can probably get in there in like 10 minutes. In fact, that's how long from, if you guys know the Germanwings 2015 suicide crash, that's actually, it happened in less than 10 minutes from the time where the pilot took control of the cockpit to when he crashed into the side of the mountain was less than 10 minutes. So people would argue that you can't get into the cockpit with these reinforced doors. You know, my counter argument would be there's other ways that you can get in. One of them is if you depressurize the plane, apparently panels open up between the plane and the cockpit that equalizes the pressure. So essentially there may be other ways that you can like rip through the walls, come in through the electronics bay, potentially. Lots of different ways that you might be able to get in there. The biggest evidence against it is that if you depressurize the plane, you're also going to depressurize the cockpit as well. And there is oxygen. I've looked into this extensively over the last week, actually. That is a separate crew oxygen for the cockpit. But I've been trying to figure out the math on it. It seems like it's at most going to last for like 2 hours if it's like one person. And it becomes exponentially, or at least maybe not exponentially, but linearly less depending on how many people are taking that oxygen. And it also depends on whether or not you have it set to like 100% oxygen. And this is all based on like what your altitude is. So the higher altitude you are in a depressurized scenario, the more oxygen you need to take in. And most likely you have to have a 100% oxygen intake, which is just going to sap this oxygen tank really, really quickly. And if you're lower, the downside is that everybody's going to be able to breathe, right? If you're underneath 10,000 feet, everyone can breathe and you don't need oxygen at all. So, you know, I would say that the Russia theory, you can throw it out. The plane couldn't have gone north. This is why they kind of ruled out going north in general. Going south into the South Indian Ocean, the problem is all those things I described before. Also, the ELT beacons, there's 4 redundant ELT beacons that would go off during crash. None of them went off. We didn't get any ELT signals from the plane. These can't just be deactivated from the cockpit. One of them is like actually, I think, in the tail of the plane. So these things would have gone off. I don't know how that just got completely ignored, because that's like the biggest evidence this plane didn't crash into the South Indian Ocean or that ocean at all. The pilots or the cell phones of the families were ringing as well. One of them's proved it on national television, or on, I think it was Chinese television, could have been Malaysian. I've posted it on my Twitter. But 19 family members signed a statement asking the government to look into the fact that they could call the victims' cell phones for up to 4 days. Like
I remember asking you not to derail you. I remember asking you this on Twitter, because I remember at the time there was almost like a truther movement in the families to try and find out what happened to their relatives. And you said that none of the family members had got in touch with you with like this. I find that insane. Yeah.
So I actually wrote another piece on that just yesterday. What did I end up calling it? I changed the name of it actually, but basically that they were forced into settlements, and those settlements are almost 100% what has caused them to go quiet, because they got initial payouts of $50,000 US, and that was unconditional. Like they just get that straight up. But then if they wanted additional money, and one of the, I think, Chinese guys whose mother was on the plane basically said that like they were forced into a settlement that would probably have kept them quiet. And so they became in this stuck position where you either take this money and you be quiet, or you keep fighting the battle of getting to the truth. Right. And this is to me, like, I was almost in tears going through this, because this is just, imagine the emotional strain on people to be forced to give up on getting to the truth when you know something's not right about this. But the reality is, like,
phones are still ringing. When the phones are still ringing, that means the phones, it's a stupid thing to say, obviously, but that means the phones are still intact. And if the phones are still intact, chances are the pockets that they were kept in are still intact.
Yeah, that's the thing about it. It's like they knew the official story was bullshit, right? And they were just trying to get to the truth. And this was years later too, where they're still trying to get to the truth because they knew from early on the evidence didn't add up. But a lot of these people, like the people that were the breadwinners in their families, are gone, right? They don't have any financial support anymore. So they needed this money. And the saddest part, they got just a pittance. I looked at some of these people, they probably got like 30, 40,000 euros, US dollars. They're pretty similar in currency. That's nothing. If this had been tried in the United States, these people got like millions of dollars each. And it's super weird because the person that ruled against it, of not being tried in the United States, there's like a rule of like, oh, it's more appropriate for me to tried in Malaysia, where like they're gonna get like nothing from them, right? Yeah. It's Kenji Jackson Brown, Supreme Court Justice of the United States of America. She got promoted to Supreme Court Justice in the years after this. Like, just when was it? A couple of years ago? Yeah. Not even, maybe like a year ago.
About a year. Yeah, about 18 months.
Court case was in 2018. Like, it's just hard for me to believe that this is all not connected, and that like, oh, you did us a big favor here by not getting this tried in the United States and getting all the heat off of us because Boeing's an American company. They could have easily been at fault. Nope, we're going to go ahead and, have it be tried in Malaysia over this weird rule that says it can, that's the more appropriate place. And then Malaysia goes ahead and they create a shell company for Malaysian Airlines that basically limits the liability of the old company, the Alliance or whatever it's called, ALLIANZ. And they just make a new version of the company, move all the assets over to that. And now this other company, like, is going to be super limited in its liability. The sketchiest part is Malaysian Airlines gets a payout from Boeing. I think it was like $200 million or something. I mean, I haven't fully dug into the math on this, but the way I'm just doing the math in my head, like Malaysian Airlines gets a huge payout. They're not paying out a fraction of this. The insurance companies are paying out pittance to these family members. And all the court cases are basically getting ruled against the families. And all of this too, they're also getting silenced by having to take these settlements. And if they don't take the settlements right away, then the settlements go away, or now you've got to try to fight it. And now you're fighting against, the governments themselves, which, as you can see, if they can cover this up, you're not going to beat them as a little person, right? So, yeah. And I see someone in the chat mentioning mobile phones will appear to ring if you're out of range. That's not true, actually. I think we can test that out right now. If your phone is off or underwater, it's not going to ring. It's certainly not for 4 days.
It will appear to ring, because I used to be in the mobile business for quite some time. So it'll appear to ring if each and every single one of those family members had a divert set up to a different number, like a fake number divert. That's the only thing. And that is too much of a coincidence for every single passenger.
Not for 19 of them, right? Like if it was one or two, I could believe it. But 19 phones, them signing a statement. It's bizarre.
Those got checked into security by someone, and they forgot that they were still on.
Yeah, they put them in a bag, right? And you throw them in the corner, like, right? Like that's how I imagine it in my mind.
They put it in a box with everyone's stuff because they clear you one by one. But so the 3 dots in the air, the cameras that are on them, and the satellite, and then the event.
Yeah.
How did all that come about? Because you've done amazing on that.
If you want to bring anything up, by the way, Ashton, feel free to do so.
Yeah, well, I think that there's another comment in the chat about Cindy. If we can pause this for just a second, because I've actually talked to Cindy on Twitter Space once, and I looked at the pictures on there. I think she was actually featured on the Netflix documentary, and unfortunately, like the pictures don't add up at all. What she's seeing there, I think it goes back to prosaic explanations, where people try to see what they want to see, and like weather satellite pictures from I think over a week later. The problem with their evidence is that, they think that, this proves it was shot down in the South China Sea. first of all, we have the radar data of it going right back over Malaysia, right? The government of Malaysia actually lied for like 7 days where they knew this plane was not in the South China Sea. And they actually searched with 42 planes and 39 boats. Okay, so if there was a debris field in the South China Sea, these people aren't all keeping it secret. There was like 13 different countries involved. So, and it's not like you can silence every single person on every single plane and every single boat. So definitely we can rule out the South China Sea. Whatever people were thinking they were seeing in satellite pictures, and some of them, like the scales don't even match up. The sizes and pieces of the debris wouldn't float the way that they think that they're floating. So unfortunately, there's no credibility to those statements about it crashing in the South China Sea. With respect to the videos, then, so this plane goes back over Malaysia. It goes into the Straits of Malacca, goes to the Andaman Sea, gets to the Nicobar Islands, and then you see the videos. So if you want to go ahead and fire off the videos, right away we can see a smoke trail in the back of these videos, which tells us, okay, are we dealing with a fire? And the reason why we know there's smoke, because these cumulus clouds that we see here only form at low altitudes. These are not high altitude clouds. And contrails only form at 30,000 feet or above. So that's not contrails. We see these orbs come flying in, and these orbs are actually ignoring gravity. They're not being sucked down at all. And what we see in the thermal on the left, they're actually creating their own geodesics. These black lines are actually in front of the orbs. This is part of the evidence that these videos are just all real. There's no basis anywhere that I've ever seen to even create something that looks like this. The orbs have a very specific pattern they're pulling off here. They're actually encompassing the plane in a sphere, and then they change formations here where they're now vertical on the plane. And then in a second, we're going to see this zap. The zap accurately illuminates the clouds. The smoke trail stops entirely. So this is not cloaking. The plane is just straight up not there anymore. In the thermal, we see that the zap is cold. It's a dark, cold event. And this dark, cold event here is not indicative of an exothermic event. It's not an explosion. It's an endothermic event. It's an absorption of energy, not a release of energy. In the thermal, or in the satellite video on the right, we're actually looking at a false color IR here. And the reason why we can tell that is there's no shadows anywhere. So this is probably nighttime. We can see there's more IR radiation in the top of the clouds compared to the bottom of the clouds. That's why they're brighter. And I'm trying to think of the other reasons, but and one of the big clues on that thermal there is that in the frame before the plane disappears, before this endothermic event happens.
Want me to bring that back up?
Yeah, pull that back up for a second. So you're watching these orbs actually converge on the plane, and the plane blurs and the orbs flatten right there. So you can see.
I saw you bring up a still on Project Unity with that.
Yeah. And that to me, like, I didn't realize that until about a week or two ago, where that pretty much proves that what we're seeing here is the plane accelerating. Because when you're trying to take a picture of something accelerating, it's going to blur. There's no blur on any frame before that in that thermal drone video. But in the one right before it disappears, it blurs. It doesn't just blur. The size of the plane shrinks just a little bit, which is potentially indicative of the technology that I had been talking about, that physicists have been telling me about, which is inertial mass reduction. That somehow they're able to make the plane reduce its mass to zero, allow it to obtain light speed. And so what's happening here is not a wormhole or even a black hole. It is a situation where the plane is going at the speed of light, faster than the frame rate can even catch. And now it's just gone. It's in another location. This might also be putting the fire out from the smoke that we see, because it's an endothermic event, meaning it's an absorption of energy. These lithium-ion batteries, the runaway lithium-ion batteries, happen because they have so much energy in these batteries that they just keep reigniting over and over and over again. You can look up videos of it. It's like you put it out, lights back up again. Put it out, lights back up again. Or it could be a matter of this very, very cold event, which is what we think one of the requirements is for this inertial mass reduction, is that what it's doing is it's creating a state of quantum, I'm going to say this wrong here, macroscopic quantum coherence. And this may sound like science fiction, but it's actually just science that is very cutting edge, that right now we are like doing this to plasmas, but to do it to a macroscopic 777 in 2014 would be like a generation or 50 years more advanced than the public is at. What it's doing is it's able to break the bonds on the electrons. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. I'm not a physicist, but the idea is that when they get to a supercool state, they begin to self-organize into a coherent matter wave. And so now what you're doing is you're turning the plane into an atom. You're turning it from something that's macroscopic into something that can attain the properties of quantum. And as we know from quantum mechanics, all sorts of weird things can happen. The big thing that happens in the double slit experiment is quantum teleportation, quantum entanglement, and we can also see non-locality, which is moving them faster than the speed of light. So what we think is happening here is essentially, I don't know if it's right to say a reversal of the double slit experiment, but essentially taking something that's macro and allowing to obtain the properties of quantum, and that these orbs are the things that are inducing it. So this is why I don't think we need a non-human intelligence explanation for this, is that we can explain the science. It's just in 2014, we wouldn't have been able to come close. But maybe it's just in 2023 where we can begin to understand these videos to be real. We had the DoD Navy leaks that showed us what FLIR footage looked like in 2017. Before that, I would never have known that what a drone video would even look like. In 2019, Trump put a picture of a satellite on the internet. This was like the first picture of satellite imagery made public in like 20 years. You pulled it up perfect. Now notice this picture. This one's actually much brighter than our picture. Now this version of it looks darker, but there's a lot of other versions out there that are very, very bright. And you can actually see a very clear shadow from this middle column here that's kind of at a 45-degree angle. And this is also looking at an angle, meaning this satellite comes from a low Earth orbit satellite. You know, if you watch the movies, it's always from straight down on these satellite images. Those would be geostationary satellites that are 40,000 kilometers away. I've learned more about satellites in the last 3 months than I ever thought I would learn in my whole life. These low Earth orbit ones are only 1,000 kilometers up. They're 40 times closer to the planet. So they're very close to the planet, and they're traversing around the planet every 90 minutes. Meaning they pretty much have to be able to see in the dark. Otherwise, they're going to be useless half the time. But what we also notice is that this is actually something called the SBIRS system at play here, where they can take the satellite data. They're scanning the Earth in infrared all the time from all these different angles, like scanning the whole Earth. And then they're creating like a video playback of it using advanced computer processing. And what this does is it allows them to just have full video playback of anywhere they want. Now, if you want to have very good resolution, you probably have to look in a location where you have one of these low Earth orbit satellites that's close enough to have like the high resolution, which is, you know, if we looked at that video again, they're already filming before the orbs even show up.
Yes, they are.
Like we're filming the plane. There's no orbs. The orbs come in at like Mach 3, like 2,000 miles an hour. They're moving 10 times faster than the plane, and this plane's turning, maxing out the capabilities of a 777 while in descent. So either they get super lucky to catch this if it's non-human intelligence, or this is just an operation. The person on the left who's controlling the drone, they're not automatically tracking this plane. They're manually tracking the plane, which also tells us a clue that they know something's about to happen here. They are, you know, watching it, they're keeping it in frame. It actually falls out of frame, which to me is pretty solid evidence it's not fake either. If you're faking the video, you're going to have the plane in frame the whole time. They zoom in, you can see the heat signature right in the middle of the plane. This is shooting out hot air throughout the hot air exhausts that are right next to the landing gear. And then they zoom out right before it disappears. And remember, the orbs changed orientation and became vertical. So they probably would have an idea. If you know something's going to happen there, like you know what that technology is, you're going to know it's about to fire off right now, right? So the fact they zoom out tells me like, okay, they know something's going to happen. In addition to the fact that they don't freak out. Like if that happens to me and I'm filming that, I'm moving the drone around everywhere going, okay, did that just crash? Is it over here? Like what just happened? No, they're like, I'm just chilling. Like they kind of like move it a little bit and they just zoom out. Like, okay, let's go get some lunch.
With the thermals on the plane, with the fire that's happening on the plane, have you looked into whether the plane would glow in certain places a little bit more? If I'm making sense there, because of the fire.
Good question. And I kept thinking, okay, well, if there's a fire, shouldn't it be like a big heat signature where the fire is, but turns out these cargo bays are like made to contain these fires up to like 1700 degrees Celsius. Very, very like possible to keep it contained. What we think is happening is that there's two places where the batteries were split. There's some in the forward cargo bays and some in the aft cargo bays. Now, you could argue that the landing gear is damaged and therefore maybe the aft cargo bay battery is lit up. But I would actually think that it may be more sense for the forward cargo bays to light up, because that's where the electronics aviation bay is, where you might destroy the electronics if it gets released there. The witness who was actually in that location right near where the videos happened says that she saw the cockpit. So it may be that there was some illumination that was allowing the cockpit to light up, because this is the middle of the night and perfectly dark. And then I have somebody, an expert who's testified on Congress before, or testified before, I don't know necessarily Congress, who says on the Hill, that they would argue that the forward would make more sense, because then it would be the smoke is getting sucked through the air conditioning system. And that's where those exhaust bays are in the back, where we see this heat signature coming out of these exhaust ports that are right near the landing gear. So we don't really know 100% sure, but I do think that it makes sense that you're not going to see a very prominent heat signature from that's inside the plane there. And potentially what's happening with these lithium-ion batteries, you're probably deploying all the fire extinguishing devices. You got the whole crew. There's 12 crew on board, right? You probably got all of them down there fighting it actively for, I believe it's about an hour or hour and 20 minutes that they have to be keeping this thing out. So they're putting it out, it's lighting back up again, putting it out, lighting back up again, you know, so it's probably a pretty hectic situation.
So the question that comes up to me is, why save them?
Yeah. And so I'm now very confident that the reason is that they're deploying this is the 20 Freescale semiconductor engineers and scientists who are on board. We've even found another article that dates just from like 2 days after the event that was actually saying like who's on board, and these guys were connected to Department of Defense like technology. My thought was they're directly linked to the superconductivity that we see these orbs exhibiting. We believe that the room temperature superconductivity can explain why these orbs are able to ignore gravity. There's been a lot of, and this is only within the last few years, maybe even this year, where LK99 came out. There are some theories that say, okay, you can use a material like a metamaterial like LK99 to achieve room temperature superconductivity. There are other ones that say you can achieve it just through electromagnetic pulses, and that you don't even need stuff like LK99 to achieve it. And the idea here is that the superconductors can either spin, or there's somehow a way where they can also obtain these quantum properties, which is what we're seeing there is some type of electromagnetic shell of some sort around a smaller object, which kind of makes sense because those orbs are really big. Like, people have mapped how big those orbs are, and you compare to the size of the plane, and they're pretty large. So more than likely, it's a much smaller object inside there that's creating some type of either plasma or electromagnetic shell around it that is then giving them essentially zero mass, which is allowing them to ignore gravity entirely. And that's why we can see them getting pulled forward along these like train tracks, these geodesics that they're able to create. They can create their own gravity.
So you're saying they did it to save the big brains?
So yeah, there's a few different theories. My opinion is that they're saving these people because they're directly related to technology, and you need you got to save the big brains. They helped create this technology. You could also argue, it was going to China. You could argue that this is for like a shadow war purposes. We don't want them to give this intellectual property to China. But it's the fact that there's a fire on board this plane, to me, leans towards, okay, these are our people. We've got to save them. If there was no fire, then I would say, okay, this is espionage, right? You're preventing these people from going to China. But the thing about the fire scenario is this plane is doomed. If it couldn't land in Penang, that pretty much means they were going for an ocean landing, and this plane's going to rip apart and all these people are going to drown. So you could pretty much just let it crash if you just want these people to disappear, right? Yep. There's also a third scenario, though, which I think you guys hinted at, which is the testing the technology scenario, which is this plane is doomed. We don't know what's going to happen when we fire off the teleportation tech, right? They might get spaghettified or whatever, melt. Let's fire it off. The problem with that theory is, okay, now you're like, okay, you've got to set up a cover story. And this is like a big risk to set up this cover story, right? Like, this cover story falls apart just on cursory glance.
Unless you had a judge that was going to make sure everything happened in another country that could easily
get
be
promoted
paid off and then be rewarded with a Supreme Court appointee.
Yeah, it's pretty weird. If that were
going to happen, then things are different.
And then the
But,
problem is you got this Malaysian minister of defense who's like the worst liar in the history of the world, who is going on these interviews, who can't even keep a straight face while he's lying to people, who he gets asked, what time did you learn when the plane went dark? Does that matter? Does that matter? Yeah. It's like the most important thing. And he's sitting there telling them that, like, yes, this plane's unidentified, but we know it's a civilian airliner and we know it's not hostile. Like, dude, you're just kind of letting the cat out of the bag, man. Just if you're gonna say something, just say nothing. Like, maybe don't take interviews if you're not gonna say anything.
Yeah.
And then he asked the lady who's interviewing him, this woman who I'm in love with this woman, by the way. She's just she's so brutal when the way she asks her questions with no emotion whatsoever. You know, he asked her, like, are you going to send a plane up to shoot it down? And she's like, well, you said that, not me. And it's like, and then she's like, well, of course you're not going to send it up to shoot it down. You're going to send it up to track this rogue 777 flying over your country. And maybe if it's a hijacking situation, you are going to shoot it down, right? I mean, this is post 9/11 world. So they try to like blame this on incompetence. But in this case, I think it actually is malice, where what happened here is not incompetence by the government, Malaysian government. They knew that this plane, I mean, they had it on military radar the whole time. They lie about it, you know, potentially being in the South Indian Ocean when they know it's not. They give the radar data to the Americans by the 5th day. I listened to the press conference. They said they gave the Americans the radar data. What the hell? Why aren't you just releasing the radar data publicly? Like, this is a situation where these people might be out on a boat somewhere on a crashed, you know, so there might be some survivors hanging out on one of these life rafts, and you're not releasing the data publicly for like weeks and weeks and weeks later. And then the official, I mean, they definitely had to manipulate it in some way, in my opinion. Same with the Inmarsat pings. Either the Inmarsat pings are indicative of the plane being somewhere else, and they could be real, or they've manipulated the Inmarsat pings. Like, even the Inmarsat employees, there's like an engineer who said that they thought Inmarsat was playing a hoax. They were getting a hoax was being played on Inmarsat. The CEO comes out and says, yeah, the data is good so long as nobody spoofed it. What? Why are you issuing disclaimers when you're being asked about your data? Like, this is nothing about this smells right. Nothing at all.
Yeah.
I mean, the technology side of it, though. I mean, especially when we look back to 2014, we're talking like almost breakaway civilization levels of technological difference to what we know is possible.
Yeah, that makes me wonder, like, what are we really dealing with on this planet? That's where I start to think about not necessarily esoteric stuff, but I think a lot about this documentary I watched before this ever happened with Graham Hancock called Ancient Apocalypse, which is kind of a weird name, but he uses archaeology and anthropology to just push back known human history further and further and further. And, you know, if you're into the non-human intelligence stuff, like I haven't been convinced yet, but if there is non-human intelligence, I'm leaning on the ultra-terrestrial hypothesis, which is that there's another civilization on this planet with us that's probably been here a lot longer than we have. They might even be our relatives, right? Either under the ocean, under the ground. I'm not sure, right? But that's what I would lean on, because the ocean's like basically unmapped. There's a lot of sketchy stuff that I've been reading since I got interested in UFOlogy in 2017 from the NOAA, which is like the National Ocean something or other group, and the Navy. Why is the Navy the one that's always on board with all this UAP stuff? Like, it seems like the UAPs are constantly coming from the water.
If you're watching that and you're a very bright guy, that's obvious. Diego Garcia, I think, is interesting that it keeps coming up, and you might care about talking about the links on that.
Yeah, so we have that sighting. We've got a 777 fire suppression device that's washed up in the Maldives, and we're looking at a fire here. We've got an EXIF data picture from the American passenger, just a black picture that he posted on 4chan saying that he was being held prisoner and that he'd potentially been drugged and couldn't think straight. And this EXIF data points to Diego Garcia military base. So we've got some circumstantial evidence that this plane, at least some people survived, and that this plane might have landed there. It's the perfect place to hide a 777. You know, I went and looked at this base on Google Earth Pro, and you can go back in time on this all the way back to 2003 when the pictures are blurry. And up until 2014, there's like a dozen super jumbo military jets on the runways. After 2014, there's like 0 or 1, maybe. It's like, wait, did they build something underground? Like, or do they just know what day to take the picture for this? Like, it's super suspicious. So I found these contracts, black construction, tens of millions of dollars of contracts of black construction. You go look at their mission statements, like, we specialize in advanced construction that will fit your needs and allow you to do, like, you know, all these crazy buildings. Like, nothing on the surface of this place changes. And these contracts are for like dredging. It's like, okay, are we building underground here? Like, that's what I have to imagine is going on. This place is actually known to be a CIA black site where they would transfer prisoners as well. So there has to be some type of prison holding facilities at it as well.
Ashton, what's the location called? I've got the Google Earth Pro up now.
So it's since in the ocean, you could dig it up, or if you type in Diego Garcia, I think it'll find it right away.
Yeah,
it's called like British something or other is like the official name for it.
Technically, it's owned by them.
Yeah, British Isles.
So it's also a nuclear refueling station, and I think it used to be rumored there were weapons stored there, and I think they finally confirmed it in some news article.
Yeah.
But for that, I don't know if you've come across this or not. Maybe you haven't. Again, you're obviously a very bright guy.
Appreciate that.
Oh yeah, I mean it's apparent. The relationship between nuclear materials, unknown objects, and phenomenon, and then all the U.S. labs where you would have the brightest people working on things are, interestingly enough, all controlled and owned by the Department of Energy, who has the highest security clearances, their own federal forces, and a third-party military infrastructure.
Yep. Yeah. My sources that have like reached out to me tell me that this base is magnitudes more secret than Area 51.
Yeah.
So that when people start telling me that, I get real interested. This base is on a ridge out here in the South Indian Ocean. So you look at this place, it's in the middle of nowhere. Commercial airliners aren't allowed to land here. They displaced like thousands of indigenous people, and it was this big human rights scandal in like the 50s and 60s, I think. They killed all their pets to get them to leave. And even now they like want to come back. Like, there's 1,700 active duty military and 1,500 civilians. The civilians aren't allowed to talk to their families while they're on deployment in this base. So I like to show people like these landing gear situations or these landings. So there's no planes on this runway, right? It's completely empty. Let's go back and look at 2011. Oh, look, completely filled with planes on the runway, right? This runway is actually an emergency landing for space shuttles. It's got a landing strip that's long enough to take them. So I don't know where they're keeping the underground building here, but my guess is that some of these things might be elevators that they built later on that let them move planes underground. This base might just be like, like spy movie level, like advanced in terms of like what's going on below the surface of this base. But as you see here, there's nothing here. And I don't know exactly where they're hiding it. They do have all these big, like, I think these are fuel containers. But there's some kind of electro-optic telescope array that they have here as well that I haven't dug into too much, but there was another Twitter user that I talk with a lot named Ink Pixie who has dug into this base a ton, and she told me about that information. So I would imagine, and especially right here is this harbor that they have this stuff in. There's one year where it's very weird. Let's see if we can find it real quick right there. Like, what is going on here with this? Is this just an artifact? Or are we looking at something below here? I just can't tell. It looks very suspicious. And then over here as well, you see, I think the same thing again. Yeah, like this. I don't know. Very weird looking. May just be an artifact, but and I try not to dig too much into this space because, like, yeah, people tell me, like, even Marc Dugain, who is one of the French authors who wrote about this place, told me that, or didn't tell me, but apparently the rumor is that intelligence like kind of got to him and told him stop digging into this. And this is where he said the plane was remote controlled and brought over here because everybody just assumed like this is the place in the middle of nowhere. It's one of the only places you could hide it. There's no radars are going to catch you bringing it over there. This is actually a good spot to test technology too, middle of nowhere.
Ultra secure facility.
If you're into UFOs, then I would say that this is the place where they are tracking them coming either in from outer space or tracking them around coming out of the water or wherever they're coming from. Like, it just seems like it's in the perfect location for all this. Supposedly the radars of this place can reach 3,000 miles away, which means that this could have been tracking the plane from takeoff, right? And even before I looked into these videos, I knew the U.S. government had to know more about what's going on. We have satellites everywhere. I didn't know about these radar dishes in Diego Garcia or these hydrophones. But after I've learned about that, I'm like, okay, we 100% knew exactly what happened to this plane, and we're just hiding it for whatever reason. I didn't know exactly why, but now that I look at this technology on the videos, it all adds up, right? It's like this technology is the reason why you have to lie about some mundane event like a lithium-ion battery fire. Because otherwise, why are you lying about this, right? You have to have a big reason. This is the reason why you have this huge, elaborate cover-up, why the Malaysian government's acting super weird, why they're willing to be looked at as incompetent when the reality is that they're not incompetent. You know, they knew what had happened as well, probably. I don't know if they knew about the technology, but they were definitely told that, okay, you know, we took the plane, we flew it away or something, right? And we can't tell the world. Yeah.
What I can't get my head around is if we go with the idea that these people that were on the plane were so special and so like incredibly clever that they would deploy this ultra sophisticated technology to either stop them going somewhere or to save them from a fire that was on the plane. Like, we won't even let the people that make Coca-Cola, the two people that know the ingredients of Coca-Cola, fly on the same flights together.
Yeah.
How did all these people get on these planes to get this plane together?
Yeah, that's a weird part because, like you just said, most companies, company I work for as well, all have policies like 3 or 4 people on the same plane is the most, right? Now, maybe this was before that. Like, we did not know, the public at least did not know the dangers of lithium-ion batteries. I would argue they still don't know. Lithium-ion batteries in airplanes scare me more than orbs scare me at this point by quite an order of magnitude. Like, I'm going to be flying this next week, and like, please, everybody, do not put lithium-ion batteries in your cargo and your check bags. Like, just don't do it because it's scary. Nobody's down there looking, right? And that's why the big fear. They let you have them above in the passenger area. And you know how often they happen just in the United States alone? More than 1 per week right now. If you go look up the FAA right now and Google it, lithium-ion batteries, they have a chart. Last year, it happened like 75 times. It's wild. And you can't put them out either. And this is just like one tiny battery on people's cell phones, computers, etc. This plane was loaded up with 221 kilograms. That's almost 500 pounds of lithium-ion batteries that this plane had in the cargo bay. I mean, it was just waiting to light up. So maybe they just didn't know the risks, and they, you know, maybe this was the one flight to Beijing, and they were like, hey, because here's the reality too. I used to be a traveling consultant where I flew every single week. We broke that rule a lot of times, and it's because everybody's booking their trips independently. It's not like we're all getting together and being like, hey guys, let's all book our flights together. And the travel agency doesn't have a thing that's like checking, right? So you could get around that pretty easily. There were several times where we had like 10, 15 people from the company. I'm like looking around like, oh boy, this plane better not go down. Otherwise, you know, these clients are screwed. Right. So that's what I would imagine happened if we're just thinking about it practically is that, you know, they just didn't think that this would happen. And then it does, because then they find out that, oh yeah, lithium ion batteries are extremely dangerous. Shouldn't have them in the cargo bay. In fact, FAA made it so that it's not allowed in cargo bay of passenger planes in 2015, the next year. So go ahead.
I would think with the speed at which, if the reason was to save the big brains, they were being tracked on their flight for some sort of security reasons. I know that happens I live near a government lab, and I have a bunch of friends who do that, and when they go, people care. You know what I mean? It's like, hey, there's billions of dollars on your project. You need to come back.
Diego Garcia too could have been tracking them very easily again, right from takeoff.
Very easily.
And here's the thing: is that this could be a matter of opportunity as well. The plane goes dark at 17:21 UTC, and the plane where we see it get teleported away is 18:40 UTC. That's an hour and 20 minutes. That's enough time to operationalize assets. And there was Thailand, USA exercises that were happening on March 10th, just 2 days later in the Andaman Sea there. So the Navy may have had the assets right there waiting, ready to go. So what I would say too is that
at the very least, they had control of the radar space, communications, comms, everything in that sea. It was a perfect storm for them to try and grab it.
Yeah, if this happens in my plane, I hope they'll orb my plane to safety as well. We'll see. But again, I hope there's nobody with lithium-ion batteries in my plane.
You've blown it with this. You've blown it.
Yeah, no, man. Yeah, they're definitely not scrambling. And the thing is, maybe they haven't done it again because it didn't turn out real well.
Yeah. And so I see some people in the chat who think that this is from a 90s video game. Let me just go ahead and correct you guys. There's nothing in these videos that comes from a low quality, two-dimensional 90s video game. First of all, to create two videos from two different perspectives, you have to create a 3D rendered environment. What that means is you're not using a low quality 2D visual effect in it. Mm-hmm. So sad to say, you got fooled, and you got fooled by a guy whose name is Mick West, whose career is trying to debunk videos, who might be actually connected to the intelligence community, who actually is the only person who claimed to have found that visual effect. The account that posted that on Reddit, you probably don't even know where you saw this, because they use something called social contagion and manufactured consensus to lie to people through disinformation. And how that works is they post something on Reddit, they bot upvote it to the top, they fake a bunch of bot comments that say, oh, thank God this is debunked, let's not talk about it. The subreddit moderators of that subreddit ban discussion of it. And then social contagion takes over. And what that means is people talk to one another. Human beings are very peer pressure oriented. And so somebody tells you that something's happened, you adopt that as your own belief. Mm. And this is how so many people, despite the fact that that video that Mick West put out has like only a couple 10,000, like 20,000 views or something like that, that's how information spreads so rapidly. And if you go look at it, and this is a statement of fact I'm going to make, they do not match. They do not match even on one single frame. And all I have to say, nobody's ever answered this question, is how many pixels match. And the reason why they won't answer is because even on a single frame, the pixels don't match. If what we're looking at is from that, it would need to match exactly. And then people go, well, you could just modify it. Well, then how come nobody modified it to make it match and prove it?
And if you're going to modify it,
to do it,
you'd make something bespoke, surely.
Yeah. And the thing about it too is what we're looking at is an original replication, original creation, if it is fake, which it's not. And if it's original creation, then it's not a situation where you're trying to make it match like you're trying to copy a master painting, right? Mm-hmm. So the whole VFX logic breaks down instantly. And the worst part is that even if the one frame that they claim is similar was a match, that wouldn't debunk any of the rest of the footage. Mm. So it falls apart so badly. And we've got images of it superimposed over the top of it. I mean, I'd be willing to share one right now, where you can just tell it's not even the same at all. So let me see here.
I was one of the people, like when we did the show on this, kind of against the grain on this, and Lee and Dave are going like, well, you do realize this was this footage came out 4 days after the plane went missing. And as somebody who I dabble with art and stuff like that, I don't do CGI, but I can appreciate back then how long that would have taken. Yeah. And then that Philips, was it a Philips CDI game?
No, it was 3DO. I was one of the 7 people that owned a 3DO back then. And the idea that somebody would have took like an explosion from a failed console, from a video game that probably about 70 people bought.
And keep in mind, there's no visual discrepancies in a single frame of both of these videos. Whoever made this is like the best effect maker in the history of the world. And then they went and found an old low quality 3DO video game effect and threw it in there, which, by the way, isn't even an endothermic event. It's a white hot explosion. So we just saw the real video. This is the superimposed version. Does this look the same? Does this look the same, guys? Do you see a bunch of big flashes coming out here like this? Is this what our event looks like? No. Our event's a black circle with one tiny ring coming out of it. You can see it superimposed over the top. This is not even remotely the same. So what they did was they lined up one frame. I think it's this frame. I think it's this frame, actually. I could be wrong. Maybe it's the one that's slightly smaller than this. This frame is the one they lined up. So they found one frame that they lined up. You can tell it doesn't even match here. That you can see the black behind it here. And then you can tell even on the border it doesn't match. Mm-hmm. And their argument is, and these little dots don't even exist in ours either. It's just like, and this left side doesn't match at all. So they actually cut off this left side here again. So, you know, this was just a very lazy attempt at a debunk. And the debunkers that think this matches, which unfortunately they're wrong, they'll say, well, it's too close. Well, that's not how it works. Like if we were to compare buttholes, our buttholes would be very similar as well. Doesn't mean your butthole is the same as my butthole.
You could probably map a
You never
butthole
know.
over that.
You never know.
Yeah, you actually could. In fact, we've actually mapped it to a donut as well. And actually, in my opinion, it's a better match to a donut than it is to this visual effect. So you could argue that it came from a donut. People have argued it came from a water droplet, that it came from a supernova. Like the reality is it's just a dispersal pattern. Dispersal patterns are all somewhat similar.
So I think you could get any explosion and find another one and match it up just like that.
And that's
It
what they
just needs
did,
to look
right?
good enough.
Similar in the
Yeah.
fact it's a circle. Yeah, and that's like circles are similar to other circles.
And that's the rub here, right? Is that a lot of people don't think critically about it like that. They just look at it from the surface. But let me add even more evidence on why it doesn't match. Because you mentioned the strongest argument is the date range, right? Which is, okay, you have 4 days to make it, right? So that's somewhat true. And that's if you believe Regicide Anand's description, which says received March 12th, 2014. Now, if you go based on the upload date, which is May 19th, then you give yourself up to 72 days to potentially fake this, which we've had a Marvel VFX expert go on the record and say that it would take at least 6 months using today's technology to do the background research on the assets. And this is a lot of this stuff is military classified assets that people wouldn't even been privy to. And they said it would take at least 6 months with today's technology. So this idea that 72 days, pretty unreasonable. There's no reference copy to copy it from. Those clouds that we see are perfect and volumetric clouds. That's apparently like one of the hardest things to be able to create. The cameras are accurately illuminated and animated. The clouds get accurately illuminated when the flash happens. Since the clouds are highly detailed, having that flash illuminate the clouds is also extremely difficult. You'd have to know how these clouds look at low altitudes, how to create the cumulus clouds on them. You'd have to recreate exactly what MH370 looks like in 2 different videos here. You'd have to know the turn radius of a Boeing 777 while at certain altitude, while in descent, because that's what it's maxing out the capabilities while it's descending here. It's actually attempting an emergency landing here in the ocean. You'd have to know where the plane was at the exact time. And again, if this is just a few days after, like, okay, everybody thought it's in the South Indian Ocean. Why are you putting it at the Nicobar Islands where the turn into the South Indian Ocean happened? And that's based on the coordinates. You'd have to accurately create these coordinate shifts that we see in the bottom left of the satellite video. You'd have to know how to accurately animate those coordinate shifts. Those coordinate shifts would require a separate program that you would have to create and then superimpose over the top of your fake video. There's nothing like this in any hoax videos. You'd have to know that the weather pattern in the Nicobar Islands had cumulus clouds in it, because we looked at the satellite videos of it, and it shows very low altitude clouds in the Nicobar Islands. You would have to accurately create the smoke coming out of the back of the plane in 2 different videos, which is requires this particle creation, essentially. You'd have to know what the thermal looks like to an expert level that would fool the experts. There's even people that have come out there that said they are drone operators, that they don't even have a basis to understand that that's what these General Atomics MQ-1C Gray Eagles even look like, with the thermal layer added over the top. You'd have to have knowledge of military classified systems that's unknown to the public. You'd have to know that the military was using a Citrix environment, because in the satellite video, we see this mouse come in there. That mouse is actually indicative of that the person logged into a Citrix environment, into the actual spy satellite database, and then took a screen recording. So you'd have to build that into your hoax for some reason, including the frame rate difference. You'd have to know that they use a specialized mouse to move the perspective around, because when the mouse moves, the coordinates don't change. The coordinates only change when the perspective moves. So they're using a different analog other than the mouse to move around the field of view in that satellite video. You'd have to know what satellites the U.S. has in operation, where they are, and what their payloads are, so that you'd be able to fake that, oh yeah, USA 229 is right there staring down. They could be sending this data to create this. You have to know what false color IR looks like. People don't know. They think that we're looking at daytime here when we're looking at nighttime. And a lot of people think we're looking up. So this person that fakes this has to have more knowledge of satellites than anyone had in the history of the world. They'd have to also know how to create 3D stereoscopic imagery, assuming what we see there in the side-by-side. And in fact, the version you showed doesn't show it, but the Regicide original version has 2 different videos that are 2 different angles that create a 3D video that you can wear red and blue glasses, and you can actually watch it in 3 dimensions.
Wow.
You'd have to know how to animate the orbs. So in the or in the thermal version on the left, you'd have to know how to animate the orbs. They actually get accurately distorted when they flow through the back trail of the plane here, when they go through that smoke.
I was
So
going to
that's
bring that up.
extremely detailed.
And they
You'd have
don't care. They don't care that they're going through the wake.
Yeah, exactly. And then they get kind of warped a little bit there. They just keep moving at a normal rate. You would have to know how to create the forward-facing particle engine that we see from the orbs there as they're spinning around on their little heat signature that you can see on them. You would have to know what the MQ-1C Gray Eagle drone looks like and what its payload is to make sure you have the camera on the right exact spot and have the right angle on it. You'd have to have the better visual effects experts than the lead VFX artist for Top Gun Maverick. That movie came out in 2022, and they actually posted on Reddit and said that the person that would have created this would have front ran their work by 4 years and did a better job of recreating the plane. They actually had to cheat that in the movie to have it like act, because they couldn't get it to accurately show that what the plane was able to be really capable of. And again, the Marvel VFX expert that weighed in, so you'd have to be better than them. You'd have to have better understanding of physics than most PhDs. The science behind what we've been talking about here, a lot of PhDs just simply can't even understand what we're talking about with this macroscopic quantum coherence, and that this actually accurately reflects what that science would look like in the real world. You also have yeah, go ahead.
The hoaxer would have also had to have information, unless he's just guessing, about this.
Yes. Right. Because again, that's part of like what I was talking about, the satellites and the payloads of the satellites and how they operate and the false color IR. Like none of this stuff is public knowledge. That picture only came out in 2019.
Yes.
So this would require you to be a military operative in order just to even begin to fake it. Right.
Have you ever considered that? Have you ever considered?
Yeah. And I'll tell you about that in 1 sec. There's like 2 more things I want to say, and then we'll get to that. So you also would have to have a better understanding of mathematics than most math PhDs as well, because these orbs are doing I'm going to say this word wrong, sinusoidal pattern. The pattern is a perfect wave pattern that these orbs are doing around the plane as well. So you would have to have these orbs doing an exact perfect pattern. You'd also have to know not to use a 2D visual effect in a 3D rendered environment. But lastly, you would have to know that we're never going to find the plane, not even 9 years later. Because if we find a plane in the ocean, now you just spent, I don't know how much hours this would take to fake an extreme amount. And that would break down the whole hoax. Now, to your point, go ahead.
I was going to say part of it that I think really doesn't get touched on enough is the way they're wrapping that thing in some kind of envelope, whatever it is. They're clearly doing something.
Yeah, it's clear.
It's something we can't see. There's a purpose. They are in perfect
exactly.
synchronization.
And that's the pattern that I'm talking about. That's where you'd have to somehow create that perfectly. Yeah. Come on, no way.
Yeah, not only that, so that's not 3 human pilots.
Exactly.
That is some form of AI assisted flight or total AI. And if that's the case, and this is 2014, this is truly, I mean, like, we said before the show, or I said before the show started, this is one of the things that takes me about this is just that in the flash, it's cold. These things that are ejecting cold in front of them, and they're flying in a perfect path. They don't care about the wake of the plane. They come in so fast, they don't overshoot, they stop. They don't overshoot. They're moving that fast, and they don't overshoot the plane. I have a few friends that are fighter pilots.
Good call.
That's exactly what they saw when they looked at it. I was like, it didn't overshoot the plane. I was like, what is it? See how fast it's going, and then it just stopped. He's like, that's not how anything works. That's not how any of this works. Yeah, man, we're talking breakaway civilization.
Yeah, that to me is AI that's being used there. It's a computer program that we're watching play out, and this is 2014, like 10 years before AI. I mean, I'm using ChatGPT now, but that's only been like the last year. I guess you could argue 2, maybe. Same with deep fakes, right? And deep fakes are also superimposing one thing over the top. They're not creating completely original works. The other thing I want to say about the PSYOP angle, as I like to call it, like what if the government created this? Because that's one of the only people that could have created this. Like they would have to create it in advance. First problem is they never promoted it after 9 years, right? So that you think they would have pushed it out there. The other part of it is that the what's happening in the videos actually just kind of completely destroys that whole angle in general, which is part of the reason why I love the videos. And I thought, man, there's nothing they can say that will convince the common person. Because if you release these videos, you put them on CNN in, let's say, 2015 or whatever, what are most people going to think? they're not going to think that aliens took this plane. They're going to think the government created a cover up because they did something else to the plane. It implicates the US government directly. They're the ones filming it, right? So if this was a psyop, what I would imagine, they would have implicated China or Russia or something, right? And they would have had a Russian jet flying in and blowing the plane up or something. And then we'd release the videos and go, oh, yeah, Russia did this, right? They're the ones who destroyed the plane or something. But no, the videos themselves just implicate the United States government in the cover up.
It either implicates the United States government, or it's disturbing to the fact that it is not the United States government. This is so technologically advanced that we want it to be the United States government. And that's what we're pulling for. That's the most comfortable answer we have, is that, hey, they're 700 years ahead of us and they're just not saying anything. Otherwise, you're talking about some form of intelligence that can snatch planes out of the air, and there's nothing we can do about it.
Yeah, and that's why I think most, let's say, normie people wouldn't believe that, right? I think that people in this sphere, your audience, would say, oh, yeah, that's non-human intelligence. Some of them probably still think that, right? My opinion is that this is our reverse engineered technology. Like, this looks like, and I've looked at a lot of videos of UAPs and what have you over the last 6 years, probably thousands at this point. This looks like it's like our version of that. It doesn't quite look like what I've seen out there. It's not a metal sphere. I've seen so many metal spheres flying recently. That's been in the zeitgeist the last few years. The black triangles, a lot of the things about these black triangles, they usually like zap into existence and then fade away, right? You see the lights light up and then they go away. You don't really see these rotating triangle perfect patterns like this. Like, sometimes you'll see them move around, but it's never in like this perfect pattern that you see. So when I look at this, I think personally, I'm like, this looks like it's like we saw that, we created our own version of it, and that's what we're looking at here. But that's just my opinion.
To be fair, we've never seen him take a plane, though.
Yeah, no, we've never seen. And that's another thing too, is that we've never seen these UAPs like take a plane away.
Yeah,
as far, I mean, they may. There's some actually people send me stuff where like I get a lot of stuff, and they say, okay, this is similar, but there's nothing that really.
I bet your inbox is a mess now.
I bet it's crazy.
It's interesting, definitely. I try to keep up as much as possible, and I barely am kind of there. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there, and like I try not to link a lot of esoteric stuff or even other cases to this, because it's enough. Like it was enough when it was just MH370. Then when it's getting teleported away with advanced technology, now I'm like, this is way too much, guys. Like, we're so deep in this. And people are like, oh, well, compared to these other incidents and events, I'm like, nah, we got enough going on here. Like,
I think all you could do is delegitimize what you've already got.
And that's exactly, I don't think people are sending me that for that reason, but that's what I tell people, is that they will just use that to cast doubt on what we already have going on. If I link it to
because all you need is one like genuine hoax to be that you've promoted that's connected to it. And then that's the whole story, is like, oh, well, remember when he brought this up, and it's gone.
Yeah, that already happened one time. And that's also the same way they did with the Zap, right? They found one frame that's similar, doesn't even match. And they are using that to discredit the whole footage, which is what I said, which is that even if that somehow matched, which it doesn't objectively, it wouldn't just debunk the rest of the footage at all, right? But that's how people work. That's how easy it is to lie to people. And so if I promote something else out there and it turns out to be fake, they're going to go, oh, this guy's a liar. He's a con man. We just don't listen to anything he says, right?
I'd be interested. Has anybody put like recreated this in like a 3D environment and traced the orbs around? Because I think it would be interesting to see what pattern they're creating when they're going around.
You should check out my post from today. I just literally posted them today, 2 of them today. Yeah, and actually they did like orb overlay. It's actually from 3 months ago. I posted it back then. But every couple of weeks, I like to repost the videos. And I was like, oh, this might be a good time to repost these. I've got, 20 times as many followers as I had before. And you can actually see them, and you can see the pattern change and become vertical when they get past that one cloud near the end. And it's really amazing, is that there was actually a PhD that responded today and said that this matches, let me pull up the description here, some type of voltage pattern that it's like exactly matches. Let me see here. The question was, and I actually asked ChatGPT to confirm it. I said, plot the voltage in a 3-phase system that's 440 volts. And they says the voltage waveform is typically sinusoidal. I'm butchering this, guys. Sorry. But that basically this is an exact similar as a voltage pattern. He said this probably can't be coincidence, right? That there's some relationship here to that pattern that's exactly 120 degrees while they're out of phase with one another. And so if you look at it on a graph, it's like a perfect like wave graph pattern. And this again goes to your point that these aren't people or even aliens flying around these little orbs. It's way too exact. You wouldn't be able to do that. It has to be a program running it.
So Ashton, one of these things that comes out, what's your background, man? What got you into this?
Yeah. Well, my background, I'm in healthcare IT, and I have I actually work with the government currently and have a government clearance. And that's part of the reason why I thought
you heard it here, folks. You heard it here.
I've said it a few times at this point, so it's not a huge secret, but
just busting your balls, man.
So, I thought that I would be a good candidate to, disclose the videos. I always think about Bob Lazar, whether or not you think he's truthful or not. What happened to him is they just discredited the hell out of him. Like, he goes out and takes this video and sitting in front of his car in the middle of the desert, thinking he's going to be a rock star and the media is going to, rally around him. And what happens instead? Nope. They discredit his whole education history. They cast doubt on everything he's ever done. Doesn't matter that his friends speak out for him and tell him that, yeah, he's legit. They potentially even go destroy his school records. I mean, that's probably not hard to do in the pre-digital age.
Not at all.
So I thought about that. And I'm like, you know what? I have a government clearance. My background check is, they checked everything in my background. It's going to be pretty hard to do that to me. And they're still going to be able to pull it off. I mean, they've definitely been trying as hard as they can, but it's difficult. And so, I looked at it from that perspective, but my background again is in healthcare. So all I've ever wanted to do my whole life is help people. And that's why I've been in healthcare, is that I find, especially in the United States, healthcare system is, gets a lot of crap. And I think that it takes advantage of a lot of people. I was just actually on a stream. I think I'm okay to say this, is that one of my family members had a healthcare situation. They got a huge bill. And I told them, call up the payments of the place. Because a lot of time, if you're a self-pay, you don't have insurance, which a lot of people don't in the United States. They charge you the highest possible rates. He got his bill reduced 50 times over, 50 times, because there was some policy that, this is the max that you can get. It went from like $6,000 to $150. And all I told him was call up the payment place and see what they'll do for you. And that's all you have to do sometimes. And so that's the reason why I'm in healthcare, is I want to help people as much as possible. That's kind of a side thing. It's not exactly what I do, but I just know about healthcare in general. But the other thing I was going to say is that my background doesn't have anything to do with UAPs or advanced science.
I was just meaning the tech.
Yeah.
Like
I have nothing to do
guy,
with tech. I'm the kind of guy who's going to like hold off and like tell you that, go look for the buried UAP that's so big as a city or whatever, that people are out there and trying to string people along. Like, I'm just giving the evidence out there. The reason why I'm interested in plane crashes is that I've always been afraid of flying my whole life. I actually flew for like part of my old job that I used to have. I would fly every week. And I was always afraid every time I got on a plane. And so when planes crash, like I used to read Malcolm Gladwell, where he would talk, I think it was Tipping Point, where he actually talks about plane crashes. And they ended up changing it so that I believe everybody uses English now, because one of the biggest problems would be the language barrier. And that people would be passive and they wouldn't confirm things. So now there's always has to be a confirmation, like, yes, you hear me, blah, 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 confirm that. Whereas before, because one of the big reasons why planes would crash was that they wouldn't communicate. And so now this person's not landing in the right location. They fly into a mountain, they crash the plane. So I would always look into these plane crashes to figure out, okay, what caused this? I want to know what happened. Like, maybe I'll be the guy on the plane that will prevent it from happening by, I don't know, you just think about weird stuff like that.
The right code to enter on the frequency, and I need 5.
Whatever it is, or just be like, you're looking out the window, but like, hey man, we're gonna crash into this mountain here or whatever, right? But
the only person
there were
in the
actually
world
instances
just
where that
learned how to
happened.
land a plane.
Well, like one of the examples was that there's these beacons that are like at the airports, that if it's foggy, you just go to the beacon. But some of these beacons are not right at the airport, and if you're not familiar with that landing area, they land in the wrong spot, plane crashes, right? So I looked into MH370 from nothing like what we're doing now. Like, I was never writing anything up about it, but I followed the investigation a little bit. I was not nearly as detailed about this. The stuff that we've uncovered, some of it I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that. Like these fake passengers that were on board the plane that got brushed away. I'm like, I vaguely remember that. I didn't really watch any of the press conferences back then. I would follow this guy Victor's blog a lot back then, where he was actually the one that cast a lot of doubt on this pilot suicide myth by showing that these these simulation points that they found actually did not match the flight path of this plane. They actually matched MH370, which is a flight from Kuala Lumpur to Jeddah. And that cast doubt on this whole suicide myth in general, because it actually is like, it's a different flight path that goes in a similar direction. And the official narrative is trying to use that to tie it together and say, oh, he was practicing it. No, he was practicing his actual flight that he was scheduled to fly that next day back on February 4th. Like, this isn't, and so, I had looked into that, and that's how I knew that there was something not quite right about this. And I still remember, it's funny now, there's a Wired article you guys should look up. If you just look up Wired MH370, you'll find out that it's a startling, simple explanation for what happened to the plane. It talks about an electrical fire. And I remember when I read that, and I think it was 2014 or may have been 2015, and I thought, this actually makes more sense than everything they put out there. And then they go into this pilot suicide myth thing, and I forget about that, right? And so that was one of the first articles I went back to when I saw these videos. And when we found out about the fire situation from the witness who sees this glowing orange plane consistent with the fire extinguishing gas permeating throughout the whole plane and causing a chemical reaction, I went back to that article and I'm like, holy shit. This guy I thought was like on it. It just wasn't an electrical fire. It was a lithium ion battery fire. Potentially exploded, depressurized the plane. Found out that all the witnesses, all of them, corroborate the same event. Mike McKay is 300 miles away on an oil rig at 1721 in the South China Sea. That's like the max range you can see a plane at cruising altitude. So he sees it low on the horizon. He sees it start on fire and the fire go out within 10 seconds of him seeing it. And he probably thought it crashed because he's seen it low on the horizon next to the water, but it's actually 35,000 feet in the air and it doesn't crash. And he actually later on said, no, I never saw it crash, but they like misinterpreted my statements. There was also 9 witnesses along the coast there of South China Sea that hear a loud noise at the exact same time, probably consistent with the explosion of the lithium ion batteries. Then the plane turns around, goes to Penang, the closest place to land in an emergency situation. 10 minutes later, there's 8 fishermen on a boat, not like 1 or 2, 8 of them. They see the plane flying very, very low. This is because the plane's been depressurized and they're trying to get enough oxygen for the passengers to be able to breathe. Or they're squawking the plane, which is something I'm going to bring back, because if you lose communications, you're supposed to change altitudes, which is called squawking, so that people can tell what's happening with your plane when they look at you on radar. Like, oh, they're in an emergency situation. And then the plane goes to Penang, can't land there, probably because the landing gear was damaged, but we're speculating. The next thing you're supposed to do is you're supposed to try to land on your belly, on land, actually, without landing gear. Problem is this plane's got 6 hours of fuel in it. So this thing's just a ticking bomb, right? It's going to blow up if you try to land on your belly. And then you might say, okay, we'll dump the fuel, right? Well, your plane's on fire. So dumping the fuel with your plane on fire, I don't light up a cigarette when I'm at the gas station. I don't know about you guys. And then what you're supposed to do after that, land in the ocean, right? But as we talked about, landing in the ocean, even on a controlled descent, is going to rip the plane apart.
Let alone
Most
at night.
Chinese nationals as well don't learn how to swim. A lot of mainland Chinese don't learn how to swim. I don't know if that's a very well-known fact, but I actually lived in Singapore for several years. And I remember going to swim class there. None of the Chinese kids would get in the water. And this wasn't like 8 feet of water. This was like 4 feet of water. And so I asked them, and they're like, oh, yeah, mainland Chinese don't learn how to swim. I thought that was very unusual. But what it's getting at is most of the people on this plane were Chinese. So even if you land in the water, this plane's doomed. Almost everybody's going to die, probably, if not everyone, especially because it's the middle of the night.
What did you do when you lived in Singapore?
Yeah, I don't want to go like too much into my own personal history there, but
Gotcha.
yeah, I went there, lived there for a few years, and not for super long, but then I came back to America, and I loved Singapore. It was a great place. I think people should check it out. I was a very ignorant person before I went to Singapore. I didn't know about the world and international situations with people. And I came back with a whole new perspective on the entire world. And
I have a friend who just moved back from Singapore. He moved to Annapolis.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I think that, people that go there, I think that they have a really great time. It's a very advanced city. It's a very small island.
Him and his wife loved it. Yeah, they absolutely loved it. So that's what inspired you to, is your fear flying, studying crashes. You saw this one and thought it was curious. What made you pick it back up this late?
Yeah, I mean, seeing the videos. So the videos reemerged on the UFO subreddit. I think I have the day wrong. I think it was August 7th. Maybe it's a time zone thing. I keep saying August 8th. The Newsweek debunk comes out the next day, August 9th. And I'm actually the person that debunked the Newsweek debunk. I saw it posted on Twitter, and within 1 hour, I posted and looked at it. There was only one fact in there. It claimed that the satellite and the satellite designation was NRL 33, and that went up after the incident happened. Well, it's actually 22. You can see very clearly they're not threes, they're twos. So I debunked that. That debunk is still out there. They still haven't corrected it and removed it, which goes to show that there definitely is a disinformation campaign. The fact that they posted it one day after this like reemergence is also super suspicious, right? And so I had followed the case on the UFO subreddit. Actually, a lot of the content, even the orbs that I posted today, came from that week where almost every single thread on the UFO subreddit was about this case and these videos. People were going into every aspect of them. The debunkers actually did a ton to authenticate the videos. The people that never thought it could be real. The person that showed that the zap is accurate, illuminates the clouds, even edited in a disclaimer at the top saying that it's not real, it's a hoax. I go look at it, it's just a bunch of subjective crap. There's like literally no facts in their arguments at all. Yeah. So it goes to show that like, the debunkers, some people are just kind of delusional about the situation. They can't come to terms with like this technology could be real and the videos could be real, and they can't look at the facts, with a like, unbiased view. And so what happened is that then this debunk gets posted, the one that we talked about previously, and that shuts down the whole conversation. The subreddit moderators ban the discussion of the videos. It gets pushed off to another subreddit where it's run by debunkers who are actually affiliated with Mick West. And that they're not trying to solve the case. Literally no one on that subreddit is trying to solve the case. So I went on there, I joined that subreddit. I started posting the evidence. My stuff starts taking off. I've got the #1 post on that subreddit. I'm the top contributor to that subreddit. So what do? They ban me. The first thing that they want to do is they want to try to, what was they trying to do? They were trying to basically like, because I wouldn't believe that it was a VFX debunk, they wanted to, I can't come up with the right term, but ridicule me or like reprimand me is what they wanted to do. They literally wanted to reprimand me because they had this mob mentality.
Cult. They're cult.
Yeah, yeah, and they banned me from the Discord within 5 minutes of joining because I won't believe in this VFX debunk. It's a literal cult. It's actually just a literal cult.
That debunk came and disappeared. Like the person that put that, who was it that put that?
Yeah, it's an account called Icy Slide. They didn't answer a single question after they posted it. There was a 1-day-old account, sock puppet account, that had to get manual approval from those same moderators that banned the discussion. And this is where I kind of took over and said, okay, I'm going to run with this case at this point, because I could tell there was disinformation at play. IC Slide actually stands for Intelligence Community Forum Slide. IC Slide, it's a play on words. Forum sliding is exactly what they did with that. Is that you push up when you have a bunch of real content that you want to get to go away. You push that up to the top. You bot voted up. It got a bunch of awards, even though it didn't even match. And then it got a bunch of comments that are upvoted to the top that say, thank God this is over, right? Like, it's just the most delusional stuff, which is most of those comments are probably not even real people, honestly. And that's how you get people to ignore like real people that were in there going, no, this doesn't match. You downvote their content. And that's why Reddit is like just the #1 source of misinformation on the planet. The downvote capability allows for that, because if you can't downvote stuff, then it's harder to hide things. And the thing about that level of brainwashing, which is what it is when you use like these forum slide mechanisms, is that if you have somebody there telling the truth, then it breaks the brainwashing spell. As we've talked about now, like if you go into the evidence, it shows even skeptics that, oh yeah, that none of that stuff really makes sense, right? So you need to have censorship of it, and you need to have people who are trying to cast doubt on someone like me who's trying to tell the truth, and trying to attack me personally. They'll never attack the evidence. They just attack me personally, right? And again, like that's just disinformation tactics for the most part. So anyone who's trying to promote those types of false things, you should wonder what their intentions are, because they're not honest, right? An honest person doesn't care if someone thinks something is fake. Like I don't go around telling people that, like what are some of the esoteric aspects? Some people think that they're being talked to by aliens or whatever, right? That doesn't bother me. If somebody thinks that, who cares? I'm not going around there saying, no, you're lying. No, it's fake, whatever, right?
If
so anyone who's trying to do that,
That's the
Yeah, we
thing.
know a bunch of those people. They're
Yeah.
great.
Like-
They're great at a party.
I
Oh,
don't get when
absolutely.
people get angry about these things.
Yeah, so if somebody's getting angry about it, then honestly, they're just dishonest, and they should
Mhm.
be honest with themselves. Because the only thing that you would do if you don't believe it's fake is you just walk away. Somebody
Mhm.
tells me the sky's green, I'm not going to sit there and argue with them. I'm not going to sit there and rage against them and come into their chat and start trying to convince people that the person doesn't know what they're talking about. The only kind of person that would do that is a dishonest person.
Mhm.
So
Unless you're paid to.
yeah, unless you're
care.
paid, or maybe you're
Which-
connected to the intelligence community because maybe you went to jail or something like that, and maybe they
Full
turned
disclosure
you,
to whoever
you know?
is going to be watching this, we're for
Yeah.
sale, very cheap. All right,
Yeah, especially people
you
that
don't
might
get
have
rid
like
of us. You buy us.
especially people that might have a criminal background, right? And now,
Oh, yeah.
like, can you imagine how easy it would be to turn somebody like that?
Mhm.
Probably really easy,
Yes.
I imagine. Just hypothetically speaking.
Oh yeah, definitely. Well, and again, like if you know what levers to push, it's easy to push on people, right? It's easy to buy. Like that's the thing is the movies make everything about threats,
Yeah.
and the reality is it's really just a check. You know what I mean? Threats. We could just put money in his account, and then he's going to be guilty by association, and then we'll always have that.
Oh, exactly.
Oh yeah.
And it's
that's
not like the
better. It's
government's
way
going to
better.
come after me directly, right? It's like you're going to
No.
use intermediaries, people that have nothing to lose. Like, because if the government were to come after this right away, and that's what I kind of realized too, just early on. This is just my opinion, is that like
Yeah.
I don't think the government's out there like killing people to keep this stuff quiet. Because if they did, even like it looks really suspicious, right? And maybe they sometimes do that, and there's other conspiracies that I'm not going to go into at all. But in today's day and age, like you look at the Bob Lazar situation, and it's like they just discredit him, right? That's the play, right? So the thing about the government is like, yes, they are it's like, the US government might be the most advanced government in the world, but their playbook's pretty simple. And if you think about it, you can maybe outplay them a little bit. I'm hoping we can. We'll figure it out.
I think
I don't know.
my
I don't
thing
know.
with Bob Lazar has always been, it's like you said before. I think it would be very easy to make somebody disappear academically back then.
Yep.
Also, if you had like top secret projects that you needed smart guys to work on, but that were also expendable and like again easily sort of discredited if they step out of line, you'd want people like that.
Not just that, like this. So Ashton, we talk about this a lot, and again, I just happen to live near a lab. I have lots of friends who are in different things, and a couple of them ended up going to NASA, and they work for different contractors outside of the labs. And one of the things I'd found of these guys are there these PhD guys who work for labs and all these, absolutely, but the lab facilities themselves are mostly owned by corporations that do business there, and they recruit from excellent schools and just genius people. It's like, well, I'm going to get my PhD. You could do that. Or we're already working on something you're working on. Why don't you come here? Keep up with it as you go. I'm sure it'll count towards that. And then they just never go back to it. Because once they start signing the paperwork, by the way, everything you work on here can never be disclosed anywhere.
And once you sign that
yeah.
NDA, and that's another thing about my
Done.
situation is I don't have an NDA, right? So because I don't have that, I just let it all fly. I'll tell you guys that the inertial mass reduction papers are being held back by Congress, and that they know about it, and they know about this technology. They're hiding it for national security defense purposes. I'm a patriot, but this technology can change the world. And that's MH370 on those videos. So if that wasn't the case, maybe I would be quiet about it. But that's the reality as far as I know it right now, from the people that I've talked to. And I want that to just be public knowledge.
I don't know if you found anything else, anything more out about it or not. The guy that you thought might have been the guy that leaked these videos, have you dug anything else about him? So the last time I heard you speak about that was on the Higher Sides chat.
And one thing before we jump into that, like there's a couple comments too about people, wanting to police the community from lies and what have you. I would say don't do that. Like, because the reality, first of all, is that maybe from the UFO community standpoint, you think, oh, we've got this level of credibility. I'll tell you straight up from the outside perspective, UFOlogy has zero credibility. From the normie perspective,
crazy people,
there's
man.
no
It's also not actually a real thing. UFology is
not real.
thing.
It's
people
considered
I've been in the
pseudoscience
field. There's no
and
field.
paranormal, right? So like
That's
this
why we
idea
use the word alien.
so you might as
UFO.
well, right? Might as well
Dude,
talk
we're-
about it as aliens. 'Cause-
We're crackpots.
Yeah, that's how people on the outside think of it. That's how some of my own family members think about it, right? So this idea that like, oh, it's taking away from our credibility. It can only add to the credibility, guys. So that's why don't cut other people down ever, no matter what. Yeah. Even if you think their ideas are silly, don't do it, because it just makes you look bad. And it takes away from what our common goal is. If you believe in disclosure, it takes away from that. Like the Nazca mummies is a perfect example of it, right? Where, you know, there's these sides formed. I wasn't even committed in one way or another, but I'm watching this happen. It's like, oh, we've got to cast doubt on it. These people are charlatans, whatever. It's like, if you don't believe it, just sit back and let it play out. Let the people who are into it, who are trying to show that it's real, let them just do their jobs, right? Especially if what you want is disclosure. So yeah.
I think there's a fear. I think especially from like lots of the like UFO channels and podcasts and stuff. There's almost a fear that of disclosure, because the minute that happens, then you're done. You don't have a toy to play with anymore,
right?
Yeah,
exactly.
I think there's an element of that, especially because a lot of these like big UFO names like haven't reached out, even though I've pinged all of the ones that you could think of. Some of them even follow me. It's like, but they won't say a single word. And I don't know if it's that they are fear that, you know, their income might dry up or whatever. Yeah, right. I don't think for a lot of them it's that the truthful ones it shouldn't be for, right? But maybe.
You know, how do I say this? I would say there is more government interference in this subject matter than most people could frickin' believe.
Yeah.
It is. I know there's fields that like different government agencies actively participate in. Like if you're doing training of some kind, like they send people in to take the class to see what's going on, to talk. Like it's very par for the course. It's in my opinion 100% wrong, but they do it. In this, the checks that people get, wherever it's going, whatever's going, it's unbelievable. Yeah. There is a real focus here. Like there's such a real focus here that people working at different government labs, if they were to search certain topics on their computers, will be brought in for a conversation.
Yeah.
And you're like, what? Wait a minute. What is going on here? Why does that matter? I like a TV show. I want to know more about it. Like, this is ridiculous. And it, like, again, watching your video, sorry, not your video. The video was put out and watching your interviews and commentary on it, the way you put together the log.
Ashton didn't do it, Dave.
Yeah,
it's on my video. People have tried to say that I faked
I know.
this. Like I wish.
No. I don't think it's fake. It looks like a real. Like when I saw it, one of the first things I said to these guys and on that show, I was like, that looks like real drone footage.
Yeah,
that looks like real drone footage. Like that's because people are like, no, it's filmed, in black and white. It's like, no, it's filmed in IR. It's white hot. Like it's giving differentiation as it's going. Yeah. You can see the stream coming out of the engines. Like this is government tech. And everyone's like, no, it's fake. It's from the Predator movie. It's like, I feel like none of you people have looked through a thermal optic before. And it like, I don't know if you're familiar. Are you familiar with the book Camilio?
No, I'm not.
Okay. I have to think of the author. It's a very good book. It was, well, let me rephrase that. It's not a very good book. It is a book. It is by Robert Guffey, who's like a author, writer, reporter. Anyway, he had a friend. Just summarize it real quickly. He was a heroin addict. Guy basically ran a trap house, and he had some guys, Army guys, but were at JPL for whatever reason. They never got into it. DOD, DOE guys, Homeland guys, all start showing up looking for this guy who was apparently at the trap house who had access to technology. And the guy's like, hey, man, I don't see him. Even though he's a heroin addict, he's not a fool. And his dad was a cop. He knows his rights. And he starts going through this long, torturous thing. What it is they apparently had lost night vision goggles. And they keep telling him, if it comes back up, we won't ask any questions. It'll be done. He's like, I don't know what this is. But the progress and what they were talking about, and like it led him to, as you talked to Salvatore the other day, it led him to talking to credible, intelligent scientists who were working on patents or had patents that had got shut down or moved for weird ways. And they're like, wait a minute, no, this should have definitely gone through. What are you doing? Like, why are you killing all this? Because they already have something, or they don't want it out in the public. It's just that situation in that book. It harkens a lot. And my hope is that you fare much better than they did.
Yeah, that's what it comes
yeah.
down to, right? Is the technology. When you were talking about that before with the money,
Yeah.
it's that this all seems to come back to the same thing, and this will kind of lead into the leaker. I think is that this all comes down to national defense, and even if the motive is saving these people or it's preventing them from going to China, what we're talking about here is technology of whoever controls this has military supremacy of the world, and then it becomes a matter of like, even if you set them back 10 years, that's a significant change. Like, this technology that we see in the videos means that whoever controls this can end any war in a day. And it pretty much means that the wars that are out there, they're all bullshit too, but that's a whole other side thing, right?
They rule the world with this technology.
Exactly.
Yeah, they're in charge of
secret, right?
everything. You can't hide from that. You can't hide from teleportation or even
that's what justifies
moving
all
something
this.
that fast. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and that's just not even applying the technology in any other way, right? There might be other super doomsday weapons you can create from this technology, especially if what we see is free energy, which is what I think it would require in order to have enough energy to convert this entire plane to a quantum state. Then I think they're exploiting free energy. We could have new power sources. You might be able to create weapons that can blow up the whole planet. I mean, this might actually explain the Fermi paradox. That's how deep this may go. Right?
Do you know the terrifying thing is if this is like real technology that was deployed to save the energy guys, like we'll go with that.
Yeah.
What if it's not even special?
Yeah.
What if we need to save the energy guys? Send the teleport drones.
Yeah.
Which isn't impossible to think of.
Yeah. And what if this is just the tip of the iceberg too, right? I think the breakaway civilization thing is an interesting way to look at it. Although I think U.S. military might just be the breakaway situation or civilization, right?
Yeah. The military industrial. I mean, you look at Booz Allen Hamilton. They're a government unto themselves. You know, they're one of the largest contractors. Their tentacles are so deep with so many different shell companies. People are like, I'm worried about the CIA. I'm worried about Booz Allen Hamilton, man.
That's why I don't dig
that
too much.
Retired.
This is why I don't dig too much in these third-party companies like Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman. Is like, that's how you get disappeared. I'm not gonna push too hard on those companies. I mean, I'm pretty sure that Lockheed Martin probably makes these orbs, but we're just gonna leave it at that. I don't really want to find out.
Ashton,
yeah. That's an excellent point.
You've had quite like the kickback from some of the community, the UFO community, that they want to see UFOs, and we're saying this is a UFO. These are UFOs.
It is unidentified,
on board, right?
Yeah, unidentified. Have you put a challenge out there? Has anybody put a challenge out there for CGI artists to recreate this? Because that would, if this was factually this was done in 2014.
Yeah,
we think 4 days after, at best 70 days after. Did we say?
Yeah, 72 days. Yeah, sure.
72
you think
days.
somebody would be able to create it, right? Yeah.
So, have you put that challenge out there for somebody to
Yes, we had a $2,000 bounty for several weeks, almost I think a whole month, that somebody else came in and he was offering. One of the people was actually there at the Congress with David Grush sitting behind him. Put up $2,000 bounty. No one would take it. There was one guy who claimed he could do it, and I said, "Sure, I promise you, I'll give you the money. You have my word." And he said, "No, you have to put it in escrow, otherwise I'm not going to do it." They immediately just come up with all these excuses why they won't do it. Some people I've challenged and said, "Yep, okay, I'll give you $1,000 right off the bat," when they tried to claim they could do it, and they said, "Oh, well, it's not worth my time." Right. And there's a million excuses. Some people actually, the two people tried to do it on Reddit during that week and a half, and they gave up right away because they were actually able to do part of it, which was not even close. Right. And then they say, well, there's certain aspects they couldn't do. One person said the clouds were just impossible. There's no way you would be able to create these clouds. And these are people who are copying something that's already out there.
Yeah.
Right. Let alone creating it from scratch, which we've already talked about several aspects of these videos. There's no basis to even create them. Right. And several aspects too, especially the zap with like the orbs flattening, with the plane blurring and gets smaller. None of this stuff is even feasible to be faked.
I've not heard you say.
Sorry, go on, Ollie.
Keep going.
I was just going to say, I've not heard you say this, but have you noticed that earlier on, like when it's partway through, and I noticed this when I was putting the edit together, one of them goes through the cloud and leaves a little bit of light on the cloud. And I'd never seen that before. I'd never seen anybody speak about that.
There's a
But
lot of smoke.
I could show you the exact bit that I
Sure.
mean.
Yeah, there's some frames where they go through the smoke as well, where they get distorted, and it's like, if you're faking this, like, how is there not one single discrepancy in a single frame? They made no mistakes, but then they were like, oh, okay, let's break out the 90s video game graphic and put it in the one frame, and at the end, it's just, it's
So
silly.
it's that little. It's just about to come up when it goes past this cloud. Now you see it leaves a piece.
Yeah.
If you put that in slow motion, you can see like a white glow.
One goes through the cloud. The second one
Yes.
shoots up through the cloud too. So it's like there's probably at least a dozen aspects of these videos that would make no sense to be able to fake, right? That they would have made a mistake somewhere or something, right? But they didn't. Real quick,
I did not believe this to start off with. Like I was well against it. Both Dave and Lee know this. I was like, guys, this is bullshit.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense right away looking at it, right?
The more I've looked into this, and the fact how quickly this came out after, it just does. There's something, and that's why I asked you the question, which you said you were going to come back to about what if whoever put this out, if it is some sort of disinformation, but on a higher up level. Have you considered that?
Yeah, and I think I was saying earlier that like the story just doesn't make sense, right? Is that first of all, you would have to know we're never going to find the plane, right? So it kind of breaks that down to begin with. But then also, who's getting implicated? They're implicating aliens. Most of the public is just going to go, oh no, this just means that the U.S. government lied about what really happened. And so if the U.S. government made this, which is these are U.S. government assets we're seeing, right? So they would have to be the ones theoretically that created this. Then they would have to be implicating somebody else other than themselves. So that's why I got excited about it, because I'm like, there's actually no one they can blame. There's no story they can come up with that the public will believe here. And that's why I've tried to stack the evidence so high. When I realized that, okay, these are real, that means we'll be able to explain everything. We'll be able to explain that a lithium-ion battery fire can be on fire for over an hour. I have someone willing to testify to Congress with me, because the reality is it's not sitting there burning nonstop. They've got people and they're actively fighting it, and they're putting it out and it's coming back up. And these cargo bays are meant to try to withstand this. So they're putting it out. They're in a desperate situation. And then it's starting to break containment. You know, they might even open the door to the cargo bay. Now the smoke's billowing out, right? And that's how we see the smoke coming out of the back. Now in the long run, they're toast, right? There's nothing they can do. But for an hour, they can fight the fire with all the fire extinguishing devices. So yeah, I think that ultimately it's like you can do stuff about it. But this plane was ultimately a doomed situation. And all these scenarios, like, why are you creating a fake video with smoke coming out of the back of it too, right? So, and I think there might even be some more evidence if I just go down to like where I compare between non-human intelligence. It's like, there's no reason for such an extensive cover-up if it's just something like an anomalous event or something basic like a lithium-ion battery fire, which all the witnesses corroborate, right? So you could say maybe the PSYOP angle would make more sense if there wasn't all this other evidence that says this is an emergency event, right? You would have it not be a fire on there. You would probably fake it as an explosion, not as a endothermic event. So just like all the details when they add up is what throws it off. The reason why it's non-human event as well is like the orbs are moving at Mach 3. The plane can't outrun these orbs. So the glow can't be coming, the orange glow of this plane can't be coming from the orbs. They would never be able to run away from it. They also probably aren't the cause of the plane going dark for the same reasons, because they would have just took the plane down way back where it goes dark, not over here in the Nicobar Islands. They are filming it before the orbs show up. You can see all that intent when we were looking at it. We're like zooming in. It shows it's an operation. It's not something that they were completely baffled by, right?
Yeah.
And then science can explain everything we see, which is the other part where that blew me away. Like I thought this technology is 1,000 years more advanced than we're at. And now I'm thinking from the physicists that I've been talking to, this is maybe like 50 years more advanced than where the public is. But it all depends on like when they're slow dripping this out to us, like when they would actually give it to us, right? And I can't speak to that. I don't know what their timetable is. I just think that they have a timetable for slowly acclimating the public to this and building that credibility that currently doesn't exist in UAPs and UFOlogy.
It's hard to get people to accept that we dug something up. We've been able to work some stuff back from it, and it's going to change the nature of reality, because now you don't have to pay for electricity or energy or fuel, and we can pull it right out of a vacuum.
Yeah, more than that too. It's like what we're talking about here is the double slit experiment being real. This being a basis to show that quantum and macro are unified means that we live in a construct. I mean, you can call it a simulation if you want. I don't think it takes away from our lived experiences, and it shouldn't change the way we look at it. But it could mean there's a creator. And weirdly enough, the religious people are the people that have the least issue with this. I thought it would be that, when we hear about ufology, they say, oh, it's the religious people that think it's demons that are holding it back. I think it's the opposite. I think those are the people that have no problem with it. The people that have a problem with it are the ones that think that, oh, whatever I've been told in school is all there is to the world, and that this technology is a science that's being held back just can't be possible, right? Those are the people that can't believe this stuff to be real, which is kind of a weird inversion in my mind.
Well, if you do enough psychedelics, you realize all this isn't real anyway. But man, I've been
go into the leaker real quick? Sorry.
Yes, that's I was thinking about how to broach into that next. Yeah.
Well, so I'm sitting there one day. We looked through all the videos and the evidence of okay, they've removed the HUD data on here. They've cropped this satellite picture.
They're a picture.
Yeah, and I'm thinking this has to be a military officer because they added this thermal layer, which I didn't even know you could do to these FLIR cameras until we dug into this. And turns out you can do that. You can add a thermal layer on the software. And so you think, okay, well, this is somebody that is a U.S. personnel operator. They probably had an emotional reaction. They were probably there that night because this footage was supposedly released 4 days later to a random UFO uploader account. They likely had to convince the Regicide Anon account that it was real, and that's why it took them so long to upload it. Because when people look at that satellite picture, they just don't even know what we're looking at, right? We still didn't know until 2023 that that's satellite video potentially. So I'm sitting there, I'm going, maybe I can figure this out. So I start looking at people who have been charged with various crimes related to espionage, classified information. And after a couple of weeks, I finally find Lieutenant Commander Edward C. Lynn. I had to do those date range searches you have to do in Google to look back a few years after this incident. And I find this guy, Edward C. Lynn, experience in signals intelligence, Special Project Squadron VPU-2, last deployment, February 2014 to March 2016, but he gets reassigned on March 25th, 2014, just 2 weeks after the MH370 happens. He gets arrested in 2015 because they probably have to build a case against him. They ran a sting operation. They tried to prove he's a spy. They threw charges at him that would have resulted in life in prison. And it turns out he wasn't a spy. This was the first incident where they had charged somebody with espionage as an active duty Navy member since the end of the Cold War, 50 years. His charge sheet, heavily redacted. They tried to redact every single part of it, the dates, the names, everything on it, which is pretty suspicious to me. He was privy to the Navy's black program portfolio. He had knowledge that was extremely useful to potential U.S. adversaries if it got out. They admitted in the end that there was not really a spy case. And there's this one article about the strange case of Edward C. Lynn, where people couldn't figure out what this guy was actually guilty of, why they're coming down on so hard. There was no evidence he ever exchanged information with anyone from China. The defense argued that the classified information in question was available on the internet. So that's part of when I go, okay, well, if it's not these videos, what is the classified information that's available on the internet?
Yeah.
And people argue, well, they claim that the stuff that he was charged with is not top secret. Well, if it's available on the internet, it's probably not top secret anymore at all anyway. They probably don't classify it like that. But they may have been trying to obfuscate. They may even not have charged him directly with the videos. They may have just charged him with other stuff, right? It's like related. The investigation into him began in early 2014 after he joined that unit. So now we have a window of February 2014 to March 25th, 2014, when the investigation begins. And in 2014, when he was part of this squadron, he accidentally left 2 flight manifests in his flight suit from a deployment that included search and rescue code names. So how could he not possibly be there on the plane that night? What other incident between February of 2014 and March 25th of 2014 could he have had manifests from search and rescue code names? The next assignment that he got was the brig in February and September of 2015. So there's nothing between these assignments when he gets reassigned. To me, this basically proves that he's linked to the MH370. There was even an article that in the top of it, they have these pictures sometimes in the top of the articles. It's a picture of the P-8 Poseidon that his unit flew in. And it's a picture of that plane searching for debris from MH370 on March 31st, like a week after this. And it mentions, searching for MH370, directly tying potentially his job to what these people are doing, searching for MH370. He ends up taking a plea deal, and he gets 9 years. 9 years. They throw away all the prostitution charge, all the bullshit charges they were trying to get him with. They drop the espionage charges as well. And he just gets guilty of like a couple of charges that he supposedly was actually guilty of, agrees to work with the NCIS, agrees to work with the FBI. He accepted the responsibility for the stuff that he was charged with. And then just recently, I did Freedom of Information Act requests to the NCIS, which is the Naval Crime Investigation Unit, and the FBI. The NCIS came back. They rejected my FIA in total. And I'm going to pull it up and read it to you guys as to why. Because it's pretty incredible. Give me just 1 second. Right here. This one. The reason, exception number 1, protects from disclosure of information about matters specifically authorized under the executive order to be kept secret in the interest of national defense or foreign policy. So, okay, if it's not a spy case, then how does foreign policy come into play with his charges? The other one is national defense. So I ended up looking up the FIRE research. Turns out Obama actually loosened Freedom of Information Act requests to make it easier to get in 2009, but he's also the one that signed this exception that we're talking about.
Personally.
So the exception is only for really extreme circumstances.
Yeah.
The exception letters they give, C and D, intelligence activities, including covert action, intelligence sources or methods or cryptology. And the other one is foreign relations or foreign activities of the United States, including confidential sources. So I look at that and they reject everything. They don't even give me anything with redactions on it. And I just got to think they know I'm going to figure it out if they give me anything, right? Like this guy has to be connected. Anyway,
yeah, they when it comes to things like that, they're not going to give out any information on.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, they're going to try to keep it, but usually they give you at least redacted documents. So the case that they're giving me nothing at all. I mean, this was a big case.
I think their slip up was allowing the Navy to be involved.
Yeah, could be.
Yeah,
could be.
Yeah,
so
that's why they wrapped it up. I think the Navy would have fought to wrap it up in a Navy way.
Yeah, and the FBI hasn't come back to me yet. I just double checked this earlier today to see if I've gotten any response. I mean, it's been a couple of weeks now.
Gotta hold the breath and keep those fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Have you tried to get in touch with any of, like, for example, like Ryan Graves? So he's have you? Yeah, because he spoke about the orbs with the square inside, and these things. Well, maybe just because they're a bit orby, but they do remind me just of that. And I mean, like, Ryan Graves would be the person to speak to.
I reached out to everybody that you guys could think of, and I had reached out to him weeks and weeks ago. I've talked to Jesse Michaels, who actually interviewed David Grush, and I think that was early, though, in September. So, I didn't have such a strong case back then. I think that, and I remember specifically, he thought I was burying the lead when I got around to the scientists and engineers. And even back then, I was under the espionage angle. So maybe it was just, they thought it was too fantastical to be true. With people like Ryan Graves, I wonder if they have an NDA that makes it impossible for them to talk about this. Because the reality is this is classified information. They know it's classified. I don't think they can even talk about it. And I think that's part of the reason why the other UFO people that may have connections to the government also won't talk about it. Either they've disillusioned themselves into thinking it can't be real, or they are actually just won't talk about it because they have connections they would lose if they do it, or they might actually just have NDAs themselves that make it so they can't talk about this information. If you think about the stuff that they do mention, they're non-specific usually, right? Mm-hmm. Like this is potentially the biggest verifiable conspiracy of all time. Just from the MH370 perspective, we're talking about like probably 5 or more countries at least being implicated. We're talking about President Obama being directly implicated. We're talking about the U.S. military being implicated. Also, just the legal aspect. We have a Supreme Court justice that ruled that it shouldn't apply in the United States. But if the United States caused this, then we are directly at fault. And that would mean from a legal perspective, the United States is at fault and it's not Malaysia's fault. And that would, imagine just what that does to all the court cases that were out there. It makes them all fraudulent. I mean, this is a huge conspiracy. And we haven't even got into those private companies you're talking about that would also be implicated then from the technology perspective.
Or the missing people.
or the missing people, or the money that's being used in the black budget programs that, you know, we're spending. I like to say the $10,000 toilet seats.
That's dangerous to talk about.
So this is the reason why I think, because this is the only reason I can come up with why all these people are staying silent. Like you guys have pointed out, if you're in UFOlogy and you're watching the 2 most advanced cameras in the world filming orbs spinning around in a triangle formation around a plane in the highest quality with all this evidence, why are you staying silent? You would think at least you're going to come out and make a statement of some sort, but they won't say anything. They're too afraid to even say anything. It's plausible deniability potentially, right?
Yeah.
If somehow this does get proven to be true, they want to be able to come out and say, yeah, well, I thought it might be real, but I just didn't want to say anything, right? Because if you come out and say that, oh, you think it's fake, now you lose all credibility if it turns out to be real. And if you come out and say it's real, you know, then you might be in trouble there too. So
I think the bigger ones, the ones with influence and bigger, are told to stay away.
Yeah,
and the smaller ones don't want to break the chain because they want to suckle off the teat and hopefully get patted on the head sometime. And we've definitely walked away from that model. Although for our assigned FBI agent, we are definitely still interested in getting a paycheck. I mean, like, let's not rule that out. You know, I like you, Ashton, but for money, I'll throw you under the bus, bro. Yeah. But no, I appreciate what you're doing. It's the people missing, I think, is the other thing. What happened to those people?
If they lived, like, you know, if we want to speculate, then let's just go ahead and speculate. We already talked about Diego Garcia. I don't think they would have killed them. I think a lot of people think that, okay, we would have had to kill them, what have you. But I think that you send them back to their home countries. You know, Obama goes and talks with China. China would have us over a barrel. And then we say, we'll give you back your people, but, you know, you got to stay quiet about this technology. And China has no problem keeping those people quiet. I think Obama visited Malaysia for the first time in 50 years in April of 2014. The White House was calling every day as well, according to Florence Duchengi. So, you know, you send those people back, you say, you can never say anything about this. You silence those family members as well, maybe pay them. Some people may end up living on Diego Garcia for the rest of their days. And then people like the American passenger, which are like the hardest ones to silence, you know, you pay them and you throw them in witness protection. You say, you got a new identity. You're not allowed to, you can never speak about this. We'll give you $10 million. But if you ever say anything ever again, you know, you're going to be sleeping with the fishes. But I don't know, you know, again, it's highly speculative. I'm not sure what we're capable of. If we're capable of teleportation, then who knows?
Yeah, I hope you're right. I hope you're right. That's what I'm going to pull for, because real people are involved and they have families, and I'll hold that to me. I hope you're right. Yeah, man, it's terrifying to think that, in all seriousness, 2 things. One, either we've made these technological leaps on our own somehow, and we are truly the military industrial complex is a breakaway civilization. They're gone, or there's something else here, or something that we found that's here, and we're either in concert with it, which is possible, and maybe that's why we filmed, because we're like, hey, we need to call in a favor. We got 20 big brains, and this, you know, and we made this happen, or somebody made that happen, or we found it and back engineered it.
There's also a third option, is if it's human technology as well, which I think is almost more scary, is that on like an ultranational level, there is a level of cooperation against countries that are supposedly on the world stage adversarial, that we have no idea about.
I agree with you, Lee. That's the part that scares me the most. Honestly, it's more scary to me than it just being non-human intelligence, is that there's this shadow agreements between various Western nations, or some people call it the Five Eyes or whatever, that, okay, it's us versus these other countries, maybe China versus Russia. I don't know exactly, but that part spooks me a lot.
That would mean that, like, the old like phrase of like the world is a stage. That would show it is. You know, it's just a load of people doing what they think they're supposed to be doing, and then above those people are the people that are actually doing what they're doing.
It's definitely a stage, because if you look at it from the intelligence aspect, we know in various locations that other countries absolutely have their assets, and we leave them alone because we have assets in their country. It's an unspoken rule that we don't mess with your guys, you don't mess with our guys. We're all going to play this big game together. it's just ridiculous. You know what I mean? This is ridiculous. This is holding everybody back. This is nonsense. And something like this could either unite the world or set it on fire. I in full disclosure, I have no idea what it would do, but the reality is I think we deserve the right to know and decide to walk into the furnace or go hand in hand.
Totally agree with you there.
To us. Yeah.
Ashton,
yeah, go ahead.
I do want to address the backlash because again, I was one that was well against this footage. But what would you say to the people in the UFO community that are like looking at Mick West, the debunks that he's giving, and everything that people are saying negative about this footage?
Sure.
Because I want them how would you get them to look at it through your eyes?
Well, I've kind of separated myself from the community, to be honest with you, just because I've seen these factions that exist there. I was never part of the community before this, and I just chose Twitter because I thought that under Elon Musk, it's going to have the least amount of censorship compared to other social media, which I think we've proven. I mean, Reddit banned our subreddit without any explanation and not any warnings either. And so, from that perspective, I thought, okay, let's go there with it. With respect to the backlash, there's not much I think you can really do about a lot of it. Like, you can't please everybody all the time. So, I've just hoped that people we're trying to build a better community of people. Like, I look at social media and I see just all this toxicity everywhere all the time. I mean, I have people just send me messages that just hateful messages. That's the reason why I don't have my DMs open like ever, unless I follow the person. Because people are they act like little children all the time. And that's why part of the reason why I think you need to get rid of anonymity on the internet. Like, it's unfortunately just social media has failed. And we've reached a point where like people would never act like this in person. Correct. They only act like this because they have the protection of anonymity. But if we're just being honest about it, like again, like I said before, there's no reason to be against somebody that is really just trying to have the same goals as what you claim to be for, which should be disclosure, right? And I have no enemies. I'm not against anyone out there. In fact, I don't think about any of the people that are like trolling me ever. They think about me apparently a lot, but I don't think about them even one moment of my day. And so really what it comes down to is that, if they want disclosure, all I'm here is to help them out. And even if they don't want my help, they're going to get my help. Because that's what I'm going for here is true disclosure on our terms. These videos are from 2014. We've proven that, which means that these predate AI and deepfakes, which means these might be the last time where we can actually prove that these videos are real. These aren't like little lights that are super far away that are being taken from a camera phone. These are actually from the military. Someone actually had to make a sacrifice in order for these videos to become out in the public view. And that person potentially went to jail for 9 years minus 3, so about 6 years in prison after a plea deal. That's potentially what it takes in order for us to have footage that's good enough for us to believe. And after 2023, there probably won't be another chance like this, like ever in our lifetimes. So, all I would ask is look at the evidence. Don't attack me as a person. Whatever you think about me as a person, just look at the evidence. It's overwhelming. We've proven the plane didn't crash in the South Indian Ocean. We've got satellites that we've proven are in the area that they had to have seen. I've got the Malaysian Minister of Defense admitting that they've been in contact with the U.S. about the spy satellites in the area. I've got them admitting that they were in contact with Rolls-Royce with this data that would have proven one way or another the official narrative is true or false, which they've never released that data, right? We've got the Malaysian Minister of Defense admitting that they knew that the plane was not hostile and that it was a civilian airliner while contradicting himself and saying that they didn't identify the plane, refusing to set up jets to follow it. This implicates the U.S. government. The whole reason why you would do that is the U.S. government says, "Oh, we got this under control, guys. Don't worry about it," right? So, really, I think it's almost more of a conspiracy anyway than it is UFO aspects, just from my own conclusions on it. But that's what I would say to the UFO community is, if you want disclosure, then I'm on your side. Whether or not you want me on your side, that's how it's going to be.
I think it's interesting as well when because I know I said something similar to this on Twitter with you. With disclosure being such a hot topic now, I find it really weird that like you say, the big guys haven't jumped on this.
Yeah.
You know, I've been massively skeptical because I came into this show because Ollie started this channel, and then I came on board with him from my podcast. So Ollie was always like the UFO sort of alien guy, and I thought when I started coming on this show that someone was going to show me something that I'd never seen before, and after all this time, I've still seen nothing that convinces me of like non-human intelligence.
And then Dave came on along and scared the shit out of us.
Yeah, that's just because I'm on watch list. That's a whole other thing.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm hugely skeptical of this disclosure movement, and just the fact that this isn't being wrapped up in it makes me more distrusting of the disclosure stuff
of their narrative.
Yeah.
You and I agree, Lee. That's been my conclusion from this is I've lost all faith in mainstream media and institutions that claim to be for disclosure. I think there are honest people out there, but I think that the whole disclosure movement is so wrapped up with disinformation and potentially even intelligence assets that it's been ground to a halt. And just the fact that no media has reached out, despite the fact that they made fun of that kid in Vegas whose family think they saw aliens in the backyard, right? Goes to show they don't have any standards. Like they're willing to talk about anything, right? But they know that if they bring me on, it's not going to go the way that they want, right? That if I get to talk on a national stage about the evidence, the conspiracy is going to break apart very quickly. And a lot of people are going to become immediately disillusioned. And yeah, from the disclosure aspect, the fact that none of these big names are talking about it, I don't know what to think. But what I do know, and I try to be like an honest, upfront people. Like I'm one of the nicest people ever if you're nice back to me. So the reality is like when these people do reach out to me, you know, the first question is going to be, why did you wait so long? I want to have an excuse as to why, because I've been sitting here blowing up the whole disclosure movement here and trying to potentially move it forward decades, and you wouldn't say a word, right? So give me an excuse, because otherwise, like it's hard to trust people, right? Unless they're genuine.
Yeah, man, we've been going for 2 hours and 10 minutes, and we did thankfully exactly what Lee and I definitely spoke about when we've talked to Holly about getting you to put that front part together. Just you being concise with timelines, information, us trying to interrupt you as little as possible, and then us, you know, going off in 100 different directions at the end. But, you know, I don't want to monopolize too much of your time, and I would love to have you back on.
Okay.
And I mean, I'm sure the other guys would. I just heard him chime in. I guess
we could talk about anything, man. I think we could sit here talking about, you know, disclosure movements, conspiracies, whatever you guys want. So yeah, we should definitely do it again. I could talk another 2 hours with you guys.
We can definitely go into that like ancient. We know Graham Hancock's gardener.
Yes, we do. That's true.
That's the level of class you're on here right now with us.
So. Yeah, this rabbit hole, like it just keeps getting deeper. I keep trying not to fall into it because honestly, before all this, I wasn't part of the the UFO community, but I was, you know, like a lurker, they say, watching, right? I wasn't at all like even convinced of most conspiracies. And now unveiling potentially the biggest conspiracy of all time, it's got me just like questioning everything about, okay, like how deep does this go? And I try not to fall in, but it's almost unavoidable at some points.
It's hard to think that the crazy people may be 70% right and they may have been the whole time. And you're just sitting back like, huh.
I'm like, damn, I owe a lot of people a lot of apologies. Damn. Like the guy on the Aliens show with the hair or whatever. I'm like, damn, we might be apologizing to this guy.
I owe him.
Oh, you said about UFO Jesus.
Yeah. I'm like, damn.
I message Ryan now and again.
Yeah.
He's a good
If he's listening, sir, I'm sorry.
Yeah. The strange connection for UFO Jesus and me and Ollie starting to work together was I only started speaking to Ollie because UFO Jesus ghosted on me when I was trying to get him on my podcast.
He's a busy man.
No, it actually has me on that same line. I like, especially with some of these UFO personalities, like it's changed my perception of them as well. Somebody directly who I kind of want to apologize to, although I've never said anything bad about, is Stephen Greer, Dr. Stephen Greer. He is actually used to be an emergency physician. So I do like to call him doctor, although I don't call PhDs doctors, but people who are actually medical doctors, I think they deserve the title. I always thought he knew something. And I was a little skeptical of him due to this, like the fact that he would go out into the desert with people and take, you know, Demi Lovato out there and whatever. But I think he really does know something. I think he's actually an honest guy who's trying to get to disclosure. And I think he's probably been discredited in the way other people do, where you say something that's out there and then they paint you as a crazy, right? And so, I would want to, say that I've had a different perspective on people. And that's why I always try to give people a chance no matter what. Like, even if they're out there with their esoteric beliefs, like, I judge people based on my interactions with them, not what I'm told to think about them. And I think that's very important.
Ashton, you should come party with me sometime.
Oh, okay. We'll definitely plan it out. Yeah.
But yeah, man, 2 hours in. Is there anything you would like to leave everyone with? Something that hasn't been asked, or some aspect you think isn't getting enough attention? Yeah,
something I should have mentioned with Ollie too is that what I would ask people is to think critically. I think it's a very powerful skill that we've forgotten, especially in the last 20 years. It never gets taught in school. Is don't just believe what your friends tell you. Don't just believe what's at the top of Reddit. Look at the headline, not just the headlines. Click on it. Go look at the details. Look for the quotes. I was on a podcast this last week where people were trying to cast doubt on a particular person, and they're just reading news articles. They're all editorialized. Learn the difference between editorialization and facts, and learn the difference between editorialization and direct quotes from people. A lot of times people's messages get taken out of context, and that's how they're able to, confuse people and get people to believe untruths. And if you actually go look at people's specific quotes, you'll find that, oh no, the way that the media reported on it is not necessarily accurate. So the last thing I would say is that, like you guys said, I think these videos can bring us unity and common purpose that we have been missing. I've never seen a world so divided in my whole life, and it doesn't need to be that way. I always think back to JFK's moon speech, which is first that the more our knowledge unfolds, the more our ignorance unfolds along with it, where the smarter we get, the dumber we kind of get. But also that, when he was talking about going to the moon, this can focus our common purpose and our common objectives into something and refine into something that can be, revolutionize the world, where we can kind of come to this common objective, common purpose, and change the world for the better and change the circumstances of billions of people potentially on this planet. So that's my goal, is the truth, and that's it.
Right on, man. I like that.
Last but not least, would you debate Mick West?
I probably wouldn't. And the reality is that wouldn't last 5 minutes with me. He's dodged these videos 3 different occasions already. I think he knows that the videos are real, and that, anything that he would say would be dishonest about it. But if, someone were to set it up in a real sense, then maybe, I think. But I don't have any faith in the guy. I think that he's got zero credibility. And that's just my opinion. I would debate somebody who wants to have an honest debate about the videos, but I don't think he's that guy.
Nah, I'd get in the way of his paycheck, man.
I was just going to say, I think he's on payroll with somebody else, and I don't think that payroll is Metabunk.
Yeah, and I don't think he would ever agree to it for the same reasons. Is that he's probably seen my evidence list. He knows he's not going to be able to refute any of that. And what it'll turn into is but I could have done this, blah blah blah, and it's it's all subjective stuff that's not factual based, and that's not the kind of arguments I'm trying to get into with people. If the debunkers could have debunked these videos, they already would have. They wouldn't be attacking me. They'd be attacking the evidence. And they try to, some of the Edward C. Lynn stuff a little bit, but what have you. But, I think the reality there is if this wasn't the guy, he probably would have reached out to me by now and said, hey, man, I'm not the guy. And I don't think we would have been able to find all this evidence on him either. So that's why the debunkers, I think, have just given up, right? Is that some of these people know the videos are real, and they're doing a different tactic.
It'll become smears.
Yeah. It's just going to turn into
slander and smear. Yeah.
At this point, we're moving above people like that. I'm trying to go to Congress with this because I think the evidence is so strong. We can convince enough people in Congress, even people that don't believe in UAPs and non-human intelligence. We'll just call it aliens. They would believe in the black budget program. I watched the congressional hearing, and even people like AOC, who's like definitely didn't believe in any of the UAP stuff. She's like, well, what I'm interested in is the black budget side of this, right?
Yeah.
So if AOC, you're listening out there, I'm not on one political side or the other. I think we can prove a reverse engineering program. I think we can prove that the government is actually doing, spending $10,000 on toilet seats to create superconductive harmonic orbs, as I like to call them, and potentially even has teleportation technology. And then for the people that do, the Tim Burschitz, the Representative Luna, Moshowitz, and Gates, I think we can push your thing forward here too. So get in touch with me, guys.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Fellas?
Yeah,
I think
let's hit it.
Good place to end it. I should have really had the thing up, shouldn't I? Ready to go.
That's not that. We're not that kind of show, man. We're not that polished.
So bad at
not
ending
polished.
shows.
No.
This is
I
the
want to make
best
sure you guys know
one.
in your audience as well, just real quick. And if people want to find me, it's at JustXAshton on Twitter or on YouTube. I might go live a little bit later tonight and work on some stuff. I think it's fun for people to follow along and actually just watch
We'll
as
pop
I'm
the
working. doing
YouTube
investigation.
link in
Awesome.
as well. Yeah, we'll put that in the description. But what's the YouTube channel called? Because I'm
It's also at JustXAshton. In addition to my Twitter, I lined them up. So you just have to know at JustXAshton. You can find me on YouTube and Twitter until we get, hopefully we don't get removed off of YouTube. I'm being very careful about not giving them any reason to remove us off of Twitter.
Oh, they don't need a reason.
But yeah, we should do this again, guys. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate talking to you guys,
so.
Ollie, Lee, and Dave. It was a good time.
No, thanks for coming on, mate.
Thanks, Ashton.
Thank
If
you.
you just hold on for a second as we drop everything down.
60 Minutes did indeed cover it very well. And there has been some criticism, but this report has now been peer-reviewed by Professor Simon Maskell from the University of Liverpool, and he is now part of the report. Ocean Infinity, the search company that did the search in 2018, they are going to use this as a basis for a new search. So there's a very high level of confidence. As I said, it's been 4 years in the making, been reviewed over and over again, and they're certain that they've located where this aircraft is.